Dear reader, in Sugar and Spice, Mason, the hero, stutters. When you hear Mason speak, he may repeat words or struggle with letters. This is the way the voice software interpreted his speech pattern while reading the document. Thanks for understanding. Enjoy listening to the story. Blessings. Cecelia Dowdy, the author of Sugar and Spice. Sugar and Spice, the bakery romance series. Written by Cecelia Dowdy. Text copyright 2016 by Cecelia Dowdy. Production copyright 2025 by Cecelia Dowdy. Praise for Cecelia Dowdy's writing. Dowdy writes with the right touch to keep the readers engaged and vested. USA Today Chapter 1. Mason cut a huge slice of his chocolate peanut butter cake. He sniffed, and the sweet aroma of cocoa and roasted peanuts made his mouth water. As soon as he had a spare moment, he planned on eating a large piece with a cold glass of milk. He plopped the cake on a plate and surveyed the grand opening of his bakery. Sugar and Spice. That's the name he'd chosen for the business he'd recently opened in Blue Spring, Maryland. Customers occupied each of the 4 small round tables in the sitting area. A toddler wiggled in a high chair, his hands and face smeared with chocolate. The kid grinned while his mom wiped his messy face. The words Sugar and Spice had been etched on the front glass windows in bold brown letters. He eyed the trays of Christmas sugar cookies on display. The frosted treats looked scrumptious. He'd already sold several dozen that day. It was hard to believe that it was the first Monday after Thanksgiving, and his new customers were already demanding holiday desserts. His customers chattered while sipping hot, fragrant cups of coffee and munching on sweets. He smiled, lifted the slice of cake, and strolled toward the sitting area. The sleigh bells above the door jingled, signaling a customer had arrived. He stopped smiling as soon as he spotted the most recent arrival. The woman's piercing eyes looked as if she wanted to shoot daggers right into his soul. "Reese," she marched over to him, her beautiful mouth mashed down in apparent anger. I'm not." She rushed right into him, bumping his arm, and the cake he'd been holding dropped from his hand. The dish crashed to the floor, breaking into several pieces. She grabbed his arm. "What are you doing here?" "But Lord, please help me. You know my stutter gets worse when I'm upset. Please open my mouth so that I can speak to this woman. A woman whom my identical twin brother has probably treated wrong." "Are you here to torment me?" The woman's voice resonated in the room. The toddler in the high chair howled, staring at the angry woman with wide, frightened eyes. He needed to get a handle on this as soon as possible. He'd just opened his bakery, and he didn't want to risk losing customers so soon. He focused on the woman, pushed his glasses up on his nose. When he fiddled with his glasses, the woman's dark eyes snapped, as if she realized her mistake. She licked her full lips, leaned closer to him, peered into his eyes. "You're not Reese. Do you mind going into my office in the back?" Blue Spring was a small town, and he could imagine a lot of the residents talking about this incident while they ate dinner that night. He gestured toward the nosy crowd. "Don't want to disturb the customers." The pretty woman took a few steps back, glanced at the crowd, as if suddenly realizing she'd caused a scene. Her chocolate brown eyes widened as she covered her quivering lips with her hand. She looked mortified, and he didn't want to risk her leaving before he had a chance to explain. "Don't leave." He needed to be sure she was okay. He touched her elbow, breathed with relief when she didn't shove his hand away. He led her behind his counter and into the back hallway. He then coaxed her into his office, offered her a chair. Continuing to silently pray about his voice, he fetched a cold bottle of water from the refrigerator and handed it to her. Did she need a few minutes to calm down? Well, he'd go and check on the customers and give her some time alone. He returned to the sitting area. A few customers had already taken their exit. The remaining patrons gave him curious looks. He grinned at them before cleaning up the cake and broken dish from the floor. "Sorry about that." "Woman troubles." A few of them chuckled. He washed his hands and sliced another piece of cake and served it to a customer at one of the tables. After he'd rung up a few orders, he finally made his way back to his office. The woman clutched the bottle of water in her small hands. Her leg jiggled. The bottle was half empty. Good. Maybe the cold water helped her to feel better. He took a seat behind the desk. "Who are you?" Her beautiful lips barely moved as she voiced the question. "I'm Mason, Reese's identical twin B brother." Sheila Parks leaned over the desk, her head in her hands. Good gracious, could this day get any weirder? Reese had never mentioned he had a twin, and it was doubly weird to see his twin now, right when she struggled to get over her massive breakup with Reese. "You dated my brother?" Dated? More like practically engaged. She'd often fantasized about marrying Reese and becoming a stepmom to his young son Christopher. But when he broke up with her, the whole ordeal had been so cruel, so demeaning. Just thinking about the entire situation made her blood boil. She gripped the arms of the chair and took a few deep breaths. "My brother upset you. He always does that to women." She jerked back. Mason's comment didn't help her feel better. If anything, it made her feel worse. Her phone buzzed. She reached into her purse. Her hands shook while she pulled out her phone. She needed to calm down. She checked the display. Her cousin Miriam had just texted her. If she ever needed a friend, it was now. Being around Mason was just too much. He reminded her of Reese, and she was still trying to forget all that he'd done to her. She stood up. "I have to go." She rushed from the office. Chapter 2. Sheila pulled into her driveway. Who would have thought an impromptu visit to the grand opening of Sugar and Spice would become so emotional? She'd found out about the grand opening from a brief article in the newspaper. Sure, the article had mentioned that the new owner was Mason Smith, but his picture had not been posted with the article. But the newspaper failed to mention that Mason was Reese's brother. Heck, Smith was a common last name, so she never would have thought that Reese's relative had taken over his building. Sheila still found herself getting angry when she recalled her botched relationship with Reese. 3 months ago, Sheila had been shocked and humiliated to discover that Reese had been cheating on her. He then married the other woman whom he'd been secretly dating. She pulled her phone out of her purse. She hadn't responded to Miriam's text. Instead of answering Miriam's text, she called her. "Hey Sheila, how was the interview?" Sheila closed her eyes for a few seconds. Her encounter with Mason had made her temporarily forget about her huge predicament. She'd been unemployed for 6 months, and her finances were tenuous. If her mom hadn't loaned her the funds for her mortgage the last 2 months, then she would have been homeless. "The interview went okay. They're supposed to call me back by the end of the week with their decision. I hope you get the job. That makes 2 of us." She'd prayed about her job situation daily. She'd been a bank manager in a town outside of Blue Spring. When they'd closed the branch office where she'd worked, her position had been eliminated. Now, she just needed to find a job. "I'll be praying for you, girl." "Thanks, Miriam. That means a lot to me." She closed her eyes, again recalled her encounter with Mason. Miriam, the strangest thing just happened. She then told her how she'd happened to stop at the new bakery that had just opened, Sugar and Spice. She then told of her encounter with Mason. "I didn't even know Reese had a twin brother." Miriam groaned. "You have got to be kidding." "I wish I were. It was like somebody just slammed me with this information out of the blue." She again recalled his jilted speech, his apprehensive, kind, dark brown eyes. "You know what?" he stutters. "Stutters? Really? Maybe he was just nervous since you stormed into him, mistakenly accusing him." "No, I don't think so. I sense he's nice, quiet, maybe a little bit shy. He's nothing like his brother. Reese was arrogant and boisterous, but he was kind and loving to the animals he'd ministered to in his veterinary practice. One of the things she'd loved most about Reese was how he cooed over and calmed down sick animals. She'd seen him apply a splint to a dog's broken leg, given a scared cat a shot. His love of animals was tremendous. She'd first met Reese while she'd volunteered at the animal shelter. Miriam gasped. "I just thought about something." "What?" "Reese may have done this on purpose. not telling you about his brother taking over his building. When her friend Tony had run her bakery, it had been burned by Tony's cousin, an arsonist. After Tony had moved, she'd sold the building to Reese, who'd rebuilt it and used it as a veterinary practice. She groaned, leaned back against the seat. Now she understood what Miriam was trying to say. Reese must have sold the building to Mason before he moved with his new wife to England. So he knew Mason was moving here. Girl, he should have told you, but he didn't. I'll bet he knew you'd see Mason and get confused, cause a scene. Your temper does get the best of you sometimes. Her cousin made a good point. She could get angry easily. Listen, I have to close up and go pick up my daughter from a soccer practice. I'll call you back later. Miriam was a single mom, and she also owned a bakery. She lived in Sheila's hometown, over 2 hours away, so she didn't get to see her very often. Bye, Miriam. She ended the call and slid the phone back into her purse. Weariness settled into her bones like hot, thick glue. She eyed the family next door as they dragged their Christmas tree into their house. Some of the houses in her neighborhood had gotten a jump on decorating their homes with multicolored Christmas lights. It was only the Monday after Thanksgiving, and her street already looked like Christmas Eve. The festive lights winked in the dusky semi-darkness, as if determined to bring cheer to the frosty, cold evening. It looked like it was going to be a terrible Christmas this year. She was behind on all of her bills. Sure, she'd gotten a severance package when she'd gotten laid off, but that had run out after 3 months. On top of everything else going wrong in her life, her mom had called last night with some startling news. She was going to be taking a 2-week cruise over the Christmas holiday. Now Sheila had to spend Christmas alone. This would be the first time she'd spent the holidays apart from her mom. Lord, give me strength. She gathered her purse and car keys before slowly walking to the mailbox. She got her mail before making her way into the house. She felt drained, like a wilted balloon. She felt as if someone had popped all of the energy out of her. She supposed her fatigue stemmed from worrying all of the time. Her mom was always chastising her about that. She unlocked her door and entered her home. Tom, her black cat, scurried toward the door and rubbed his face onto her legs. His missing left eye was permanently shut. He meowed when he spotted her. Hi, boy. She dropped her purse and mail on the coffee table and scooped up her cat. Tears tumbled from her eyes, wetting the cat's fur. Tom had been an abandoned cat left at the shelter. When she'd initially spotted him, she'd felt that he'd be the perfect cat to bring home as a pet. Tom scurried from her arms, probably not liking the wet streaks she left in his fur. She sniffed and changed her clothes, wiped her wet eyes. She glanced at the undecorated Christmas tree resting in the middle of her living room. The forlorn-looking tree made her feel even worse. After pulling the fake tree out the day after Thanksgiving, she'd thought she'd decorate it, but she just didn't have the energy to do that yet. She trudged into the kitchen, where Tom sat beside his dish, silently begging for food. She poured some dry cat food into his dish. The crunch of Tom eating filled the kitchen. She sighed, opened the cupboard, and pulled out a box of mac and cheese. She was so tired of mac and cheese. She'd been eating a lot of cheap meals for the last few months. Mac and cheese, beans, canned tuna. The list of cheap foods proved limiting. She'd also eaten lots of packages of ramen noodle soup. Oh, how she craved a thick, juicy, well-done steak. As soon as she got a job, she was going out to the steakhouse for dinner. She turned the burner on, boiled some water. She then dumped the pasta into the pot. Minutes later, she tossed the cooked pasta with a splash of milk and powdered cheese. She sat at the table, bowed her head. Lord, thank you for this food. Please help me to stay strong. Amen. She took a bite of her dinner. Well, at least she had something to eat. She needed to stop complaining and realize how blessed she truly was. After she'd eaten her meal, she flipped through her mail. Oh my goodness. She'd been halfway through the stack of mail when she stopped. She'd received a letter from her dad. Several months ago, he'd written her a letter, stating that he'd be getting out of prison. At the time, she'd mistakenly thought he'd be released into society. It had turned out he was being transferred to a minimum security facility. She ripped the letter open, her fingers shaking. Sheila, I'm being released on December 20th. I'll need a couple of days to settle in at my halfway house, but I wondered if we could meet on December 22nd. I know there's a diner not far from where I'll be living. We could meet there if you'd like. I really want this to be a special Christmas. I want to see you for the holidays this year. Since my imprisonment, this will be my first Christmas on the outside, and I want to celebrate it with you. Please see if you can fly up and visit me. Please stay for a few days so that we can get to know each other again. Love, Daddy. She scanned the letter once, twice, 3 times. She fisted the letter and leaned back into her chair. Jesus, please help me. What am I going to do? Chapter 3. A few hours after reading her dad's letter, Sheila couldn't sleep. She'd called her cousin Miriam, interrupting her cousin's sleep. Sheila had her cell phone on the speaker setting, spoke to Miriam, while she typed into her computer, looking at airline fees. Miriam, are you still there? When she'd told her cousin about her dad's release, all she'd gotten was silence. Miriam sucked in a huge gulp of air. She finally found her voice. You're going to see your daddy? After all these years? Yes. Well, she hoped to. She'd need to fly to Washington State. She needed to purchase an airline ticket. However, since she was almost penniless, she honestly didn't think she'd be able to make a reservation. But she'd try. Are you okay? Miriam softened her voice. Sheila stopped typing and gulped a huge breath of air. She could be honest with her cousin. No, I'm not. Her voice broke, but she swallowed and forced herself to calm down. Maybe you should wait a bit to see him. Maybe go sometime next year. No, I don't want to wait. How could she best explain this to Miriam? I need to reconnect with my dad. It's always bothered me that he's been in prison and that my mom had to raise me alone. I feel like he's the missing piece in my life. Once I reconnect with him, everything will be okay. Oh, Sheila, I'm sorry to hear that you feel that everything is not okay in your life. She didn't want Miriam feeling sorry for her. You know what I mean. Dad being gone has always bothered me. Once I renew my relationship with him, then those negative thoughts won't bother me anymore. I hope you're right. I'll be praying for you. She yawned. I'm sorry that I woke you up, Miriam, but I really needed to speak with you about this. I know you have to get up to open your bakery tomorrow, so I'm going to let you go. After she hung up the phone, she focused on her computer. She checked the available line of credit on her credit card. Available credit, 0. She was barely making the monthly minimum payment. Well, she'd call her credit card company. After she'd punched the number into her phone and gone through a series of steps, she finally reached a customer service representative. I'd like to get an increase on my credit line, please. She patiently waited, tapped her foot, and yawned. It was after 2 a.m. and she needed to get some sleep. She figured she'd have a hard time falling asleep that night. Finally, the customer service representative came back on the line. I'm sorry, you're not eligible for an increase. We just increased your limit last month. Sheila winced. She'd gotten the increase so that she could buy groceries. What was she going to do now? Thank you. Lord, please provide a way for me to visit my daddy for Christmas. Amen. Mason glanced at his watch. 4 a.m. He stood in front of Sugar and Spice. He grinned, eyeing the streetlight that shined on the display window. So, he had his own bakery, finally. As soon as his brother had called him, stating that he was going to be moving to London because he'd gotten married, he'd gotten an offer he couldn't refuse. He unlocked the door, as memories of his brother's sudden departure drifted through his mind. Reese had wanted to sell his building, and Mason had gotten the building cheap. His brother had only used the building for a short time before Mason had purchased it from him. According to Reese, the building had been used as a bakery before it had been destroyed by fire. Reese had purchased the building from a woman named Tony, the former bakery owner. Reese had been in town for less than a year before he'd sold the building to Mason. Mason had been working at a prestigious hotel in Baltimore before he'd relocated to Blue Spring. Since Reese had used the building as a veterinary practice, Mason had had some minor construction done to the bakery before he'd moved to Blue Spring. He strolled back to the kitchen. He washed his hands and took a wad of dough and dumped it onto the counter. He selected a rolling pin, and as he rolled out dough, he thought about his grand opening the previous day. That beautiful woman had plagued his thoughts all night. He turned the oven on to preheat. He then selected a dough cutter. He pressed the cutter into the dough, flipping the circles onto a large sheet pan. The woman's large, dark eyes had shimmered with tears. Her pain and dejection cut straight to his soul. Since Reese had recently gotten married, he could only imagine that his brother had dated 2 women at the same time. Mason grunted, slamming the pan of unbaked donuts into the hot oven. He continued cutting and baking donuts, thoughts of Reese plaguing his mind. Hopefully, marriage would soften his brother and make him more compassionate. Reese had always been a selfish womanizer. Taking a large mixing bowl, he dumped in powdered sugar, softened butter, and milk. He started the mixer, making a thin glaze for his donuts. When they'd been in high school, his brother was always breaking some girl's heart. Mason had always been the one left to pick up the pieces. His brother's ex-girlfriends always came running to him for comfort, trying to force him to help them understand why Reese only thought of himself. He'd become known for comforting his brother's cast-offs, although he'd come to realize some of them only liked being around him, only because he reminded them of Reese. When Reese had broken up with his girlfriend shortly before the senior prom, the woman had later mistakenly attacked Mason for his brother's mistreatment. When the girl realized her mistake, she'd tearfully asked if he'd be her prom date since Reese had dumped her. Mason had agreed to accompany her to the prom. He'd always been dateless, unless he was consoling one of his brother's cast-offs. He had a hard time asking a woman out. He'd stuttered so much, been so nervous, the invite just never clearly made it out of his mouth. How pathetic was that? When he'd taken the distraught girl to the prom, he'd been in heaven. He'd secretly had a crush on her, and taking her to the prom had been like a dream come true. While they'd shared dinner, he'd been telling her about how much he enjoyed playing on the football team. He'd gotten excited being with her, telling her about his plays on the football field, and his stutter had gotten worse. She'd gently touched his hand, told him that he should consider a career in modeling. "Your face is as handsome as sin, and you've got a sexy, muscular body. At least as a model, you won't have to talk. Your stutter sounds horrible." She'd looked directly into his eyes. "You're not a smooth-talking man like your brother." That had hurt. Bad. He winced, turned off the mixer and poured the glaze over the cooled donuts. As he placed the trays into the display case, he continued with his dark thoughts. Just like in high school, what had happened yesterday just proved that things hadn't changed. The distraught woman who'd come into his bakery had mistaken him for Reese. He sensed she'd be back, wanting some sort of explanation for Reese's insensitivity. But he was attracted to her. He couldn't deny that. What was he going to do if she returned? Was he attracted to her simply because she dated Reese, and he felt familiar being in the role of consoling his brother's cast-offs? Or was he attracted to her because of her dark, delicate beauty and the pain she suffered? He could relate to suffering from pain. He'd been hearing comments from friends, family, and strangers about his stutter his entire life. He was 30 years old. Seemed like he'd be used to hearing folks comment about the way he spoke. But the negative comments, looks of pity, still bothered him. "Lord, I know what it's like to be in pain. What can I do to make this woman feel better?" Kindness. The word popped into his brain like a kernel of truth. He'd be kind to this woman, be there for her if that's what she wanted. For some uncanny reason, he'd always felt it was his duty to console Reese's ex-girlfriends. He guessed it was because he felt partially responsible for their pain since he looked exactly like his brother. He figured seeing his face made the women remember their pain. So, he could only do what felt natural. Well, if the woman returned, he'd help her in any way that he could. He flipped the sign in the door from closed to open. He didn't even know the name of the woman who'd attacked him yesterday. Perhaps he'd know more about her in time. He hoped so. Chapter 4. Sheila parked her car in front of Sugar and Spice. She yawned, fatigued. Oh, how she now suffered from her sleepless night. She'd had to drink 2 large cups of coffee in order to stay awake for her job interview earlier that day. After her conversation with the credit card company, she'd finally fallen asleep. She dreamt about her dad. The last time she'd seen him was when she was 7 years old. When she'd been a kid, every time there was a school holiday, she'd had lunch with her dad at the cafeteria at his job. Her dad had been a janitor, and he'd prided himself on his hard work. She closed her eyes, recalling the most vivid memory from those cafeteria lunches. Her dad used to get both of them glasses, filled with vanilla soft-serve ice cream. He'd then buy them each a cold bottle of root beer. They'd poured the root beer over the ice cream and indulged in a root beer float. Taking a deep breath, she pulled the framed picture from the paper bag. After receiving her dad's letter, she'd removed this picture from the bottom of her drawer and carried it around with her. She only looked at this picture once in a while. For some reason, while she'd been feasting on the float with her dad, one of the company employees had taken their picture. She honestly couldn't recall why the employee had a camera. She'd felt connected to her dad, loved. But all of that changed the day he was hauled off to jail. Then there was his trial before he was sentenced to prison. She winced and swallowed, replaced the picture back into the worn paper bag. Her mom had never forgiven her dad for his crimes, and she'd badmouthed him for as far back as Sheila could recall. She'd grown up fatherless, and now she would be seeing her dad for the first time since she was 7 years old. That is, if she could come up with the money to buy a plane ticket. She wanted to see her dad as soon as he was released. She'd found an airline that allowed her to reserve a seat, with the stipulation that she pay for the ticket 3 days before departure. She figured she'd need a hotel, too. Maybe she could find a cheap hotel once she arrived in the state of Washington. Well, she'd worry about the hotel later. If she didn't come up with the money, then the reservation would be canceled. She couldn't ask her mom for more money. She didn't want to ask her best friend Tony for another loan either. She doubted Miriam had the funds to spare. Besides, she already owed Miriam a few $100s. Owing money to so many folks made her sick, literally. She needed a job, and until she found one, she was stuck eating cheap meals and barely making ends meet. She pushed the unpleasant thoughts from her mind. She glanced at the window of Sugar and Spice. Mason needed some Christmas cheer added to his place. She could imagine spraying frosted paint on the window and placing a small tree in the corner. The previous day, she'd been so eager to leave Sugar and Spice, unnerved about being around somebody who resembled Reese. Now she needed to apologize to Mason for lashing out at him. After all, it wasn't his fault that he resembled his no-good brother. She swallowed and finally made her way towards Sugar and Spice. The closed sign hung on the door. She stopped and sighed. She pushed the door, and surprisingly, it opened. The bell above the door tinkled, and Sheila paused. The booming voice of someone filled the small bakery. The Christmas song, an old favorite tune by Nat King Cole, was being sung by Mason. At least, she thought it was Mason. His deep, sexy voice boomed from the back of the bakery. She stopped, found herself swaying to the music. When he finally came from behind the kitchen, he stopped as soon as he spotted her. Dang! He didn't know she'd been out here. He loved being able to let loose and sing when he was alone. His stutter usually disappeared when he sang. Well, since she was here, looked like he needed to talk to her. He swallowed and approached her. Goodness, she looked even more gorgeous than she did the previous day. She removed her coat, and her dark business suit hugged her trim body. Tiny diamonds sparkled from her ears, and her dark hair was swept up into an elegant bun. He finally found his voice. Hi. She smiled. A dimple winked from her left cheek. Hi. Is it okay if I talk to you for a few minutes? Sure. He pulled a chair out for her. Have a seat. She smiled while she made herself comfortable in the chair. He rubbed his hands together. For some reason, he wanted to make a good impression on her. I'll be right back. He rushed to his kitchen. He wished he didn't stutter. It had been years since he'd been so taken with a woman in a few minutes' time. Since his mouth was all jumbled with words he had a hard time expressing, maybe he could make himself heard through his actions. He quickly brewed a pot of his chocolate hazelnut coffee. He flavored the coffee with a hazelnut paste, and his customers raved about the beverage. He then pulled out his special chocolate peanut butter cake. He cut 2 generous slices of the cake and added a dollop of his homemade whipped cream at the side. He smiled as he placed both of the items on the table. Her shoulders drooped, and she'd appeared dejected when she'd entered his shop. But now, he hoped that she would feel better. Chapter 5. Sheila eyed the cake. Her stomach growled. She'd skipped lunch and she was famished. Not wanting to spend her limited funds on fast food, she'd planned on making egg salad for dinner when she got home. Eggs had been on sale for $1, and she'd gotten a few cartons. This cake would be a tasty appetizer before her unappealing meal. She gave him a small smile. Thanks. It was almost as if this man could read her mind and he knew that she was hungry. The delicious scent of hazelnut and chocolate wafted from the cup of steaming coffee. She took a sip, and a delicious melody of chocolate, hazelnut, and coffee played in her mouth. Her eyes popped open. This is the best coffee I've ever tasted in my life. He grinned. Try the cake. She took the fork and sliced into the cake. She popped a bite into her mouth, and her eyes widened. The peanut butter icing blended with the rich, moist chocolate cake so well. The sweetness of the treat made her mouth water. She enjoyed bite after bite, and she didn't realize she was moaning until Mason opened his mouth and laughed. His laughter boomed through the bakery like sleigh bells. She returned his grin, almost forgetting that the two of them barely knew one another. With a start, she realized she was attracted to this stranger. She wasn't sure if she felt so comfortable with him because he was Reese's twin, or if it was because he was such a nice, considerate man. She glanced down at her empty plate. Her cake was gone. She could go for another piece, but didn't want to ask. She really had to watch her money, and she honestly didn't think she could afford to pay for a slice of cake. Her skin warmed. The combination of hot coffee and sweet cake made her feel good. As if reading her mind, Mason pushed his plate of cake toward her, and she enjoyed that piece too, savoring bite after bite, more slowly this time. She finally popped the last bite of cake into her mouth. That was the best chocolate cake I've ever eaten in my entire life. No way could she tell Tony that she'd finally found a cake that topped hers. Tony was an expert on chocolate treats. It was rare to find a chocolate cake that tasted better than Tony's. He dipped his head, grinned, while he eyed the empty plates. Thank you. Glad you enjoyed it. What's your name? How could she have forgotten to introduce herself? I'm Sheila. Nice to meet you. She shook his offered hand. His warm brown fingers felt comforting. She crossed her legs, realized he stared at her black pumps. You look nice. Thanks. Okay, now that she'd had cake and coffee and she'd introduced herself, she figured she needed to tell him what was on her mind. Their aborted conversation from the previous day bothered her. It bothered her a lot. However, since she'd eaten the cake and drank the coffee, she'd found her dark mood had lifted. Whoever thought that a piece of cake could change her outlook in the span of a few minutes? She glanced at the table for a few seconds and gathered her thoughts. Look, I'm sorry about how I stormed in here yesterday, thinking that you were Reese. I should have stopped to think about it before verbally attacking you. Reese is not a baker, and it wouldn't make sense for him to move to town to open a new bakery. She stopped speaking, peered directly into his handsome face. I was just so confused. You look just like Reese, and he never told me he had a twin brother. Why would he not tell me something like that? Reese is ashamed of me, and it takes him a long time to trust people. You probably didn't know him as well as you thought. Whew, talk about being sucker punched. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a few seconds. You're wrong about that. I dated Reese for 6 months. I even spent a lot of time with his son Chris, too. I knew both of them very well. He studied her with his mesmerizing chocolate brown eyes. Her breath caught. His chiseled cheeks were covered with 5 o'clock shadow, and the urge to remove his glasses made her fingers twitch. I'm his identical twin. I know him better than anybody on this earth. He sipped his coffee before focusing on her again. You probably spent more time with Chris than with our Reese, had she? She lifted her coffee cup before realizing it was empty. Mason left the table and returned with the pot of coffee. He topped off her cup, added cream and sugar to her drink. The scent of his cologne wafted toward her. Whoa. Being around Mason was too... She wasn't sure what, but it was almost too much of something. It was almost as if he knew more about her than she knew about him, and they'd just met the previous day. How weird was that? She sipped her coffee, relishing the delicious taste while closing her eyes. Before meeting Reese, she'd been sad, missing her friend Tony because she'd moved to Chicago and had gotten married to Jason. Reese had waltzed into her life so suddenly. They'd hit it off immediately. She'd been taken in by his good looks, warmth, and charm. She recalled their 6-month courtship. He'd insisted she meet little Christopher almost immediately. The 6-year-old child had been adorable. Chris had been a child by Reese's former girlfriend from years ago. Chris's mom had died a year after he'd been born. The fact that Chris was motherless touched a spot deep within the core of her being. She recalled being raised without her dad, and she wanted little Christopher to have a steady female presence in his life. Sheila had taken Chris to all of his scout troop meetings and all of his soccer games and practices. Reese had even placed her on Chris's emergency contact list at school. She'd often picked up Christopher from school when Reese couldn't make it. She had spent more time with Chris than with Reese. Why'd it take a stranger to make her realize this? She swallowed, took another enjoyable sip of coffee. You know that I'm right, his deep voice interrupted her thoughts. She finally nodded. Yes. Was it possible that Reese only dated her because he wanted her to help babysit his child? Maybe he never really loved her after all. Perhaps he wanted a babysitter for Christopher until he found somebody he fancied, somebody like a beautiful British model. She shook the haunting thought away. It was time for her to focus on something else. Do you ever see Christopher? He shook his head. Not much. About once a year. He's a nice kid. Nice? That kid was awesome. She leaned back into the chair, took her pumps off. Being around Mason in this bakery made her feel like she was at home. This bakery proved nostalgic for her, and she could imagine herself getting comfortable in this place. I miss Chris. I want to see him again. Next time I see Reese and see Chris, maybe I can bring you with me. Excitement swirled through her. Oh, to see that little boy again. Really? When will you see them again? He gave her a small smile, toyed with his empty coffee cup. Not sure yet. She nodded. Well, when he did go and visit them, she'd be sure to try and finagle an invite to tag along, but if he went to London to visit, she doubted she could come, unless she found a good job. She barely had the money to buy food, let alone buy a ticket to London. Besides, Reese would be there with his wife. How weird would that be to see him again, as someone's husband? She shook the thought away. Are you coming home from work? She shook her head. She needed all the help she could get, so she may as well be honest with him. I had a job interview. I'm unemployed. If you know anybody who has a job opening in the banking industry, then let me know. She went on to tell him about the trials of finding a job, being over or underqualified. It's been 6 months with no job, Mason. I'm so tired of eating mac and cheese that I could just puke. The thoughts of her recent contact with her dad swirled through her mind. The urge to confide in Mason consumed her. She wanted him to know how much she wanted to come up with the money to visit her dad. No, she didn't want to tell him about that. She barely knew Mason. No need telling all of her secrets. Sorry to hear that. Have you ever worked in a bakery before? She nodded. Yes, my best friend Tony used to run this bakery. I helped her out when she was short-staffed. Do you want to make some money while you look for a job? She blinked, looked at him. Did she want to make some extra money? Of course she did. What did you have in mind? He pointed behind the cookie display. A help wanted sign hung behind the counter. How could she have missed that? I need somebody to help me in the bakery. The job is yours until you find employment. He went on to tell her how much he'd be willing to pay. Of course, it was nowhere near the salary she'd made as a bank manager, but the extra funds should at least make it possible for her to buy a plane ticket to see her dad for Christmas. Thank you, Jesus. Life was suddenly looking better. She offered her hand. Mason, you've got yourself a deal. They shook hands, and the warmth from his fingers skittered up her arm. Chapter 6. Mason eyed Sheila as she placed the reindeer-shaped cookies into the monogrammed sugar and spice box. The customer paid for the sweets, as jingle bells played from the speakers behind the counter. Sheila then rushed from table to table, removing soiled napkins and dirty silverware, wiping down each table with a damp cloth. She then swept the floor, every once in a while stopping to admire the bright red poinsettias resting on the tables. This was Sheila's second day of employment, and, so far, she was the hardest worker he'd ever had. On her first day, she gently told him that his bakery needed a bit more Christmas spirit. He'd given her some money, and she'd gone out and purchased the poinsettias and the small artificial Christmas tree in the corner. She'd suggested adding Christmas music, and soon, the customers had started buzzing, claiming how much they loved the changes. She'd even gently suggested leaving a tip jar near the register. My friend Tony had a tip jar, and she made a good chunk of money at the end of the day from tips. He'd been moderately surprised to see that they had made $25 in tips that first day. Sheila had been ecstatic. He didn't think $25 was very much money, but Sheila seemed to appreciate the spare funds. Her large, dark eyes had been bright as she'd counted the money from the tip jar. She'd split the funds in half so that they each got a portion. He gently told her that she could keep all of the tips herself. She'd been stunned. Are you sure? Her dark eyes had been apprehensive. He wasn't sure why she was hesitant on keeping all of the money herself. He'd given her a warm smile, resisted the sudden urge to kiss her cute face. Yes, I'm sure, he'd responded. Sheila earned every bit of that tip money herself, helping out with the customers. She was better at communicating with his clients. After all, she didn't stutter. He kind of liked having someone else to take orders from the customers and help him out. However, the best change had been seeing Sheila in his bakery. He'd caught himself staring at her frequently, and a few times she'd caught him looking at her. She'd appeared flustered at his scrutiny, and he'd again silently cursed his dreaded stutter. The sleigh bells above the door rang, signaling a customer had arrived. The mailman scurried into his shop, his mailbag swung over his shoulder. Here you go. The mailman pressed a stack of mail into his hand as he scrutinized the bakery. The tiny blue and white lights on the Christmas tree sparkled with warmth. The empty boxes that Sheila had wrapped with gold and silver paper nestled beneath the tree in a neat pile. Sugared Christmas cookies filled the display, and children scampered into the bakery from the cold. They approached the Christmas tree, pointing, their young voices raised in excitement. The mailman grinned as Mason handed him a free cookie to enjoy. "This place looks nice, just like Christmas." The postman bit into the cookie, smiled, and tipped his hat as he took his exit. Mason focused on the mail. He flipped through the envelopes and stopped when he spotted a thick, cream-colored envelope with cursive script. He scanned the bakery, making sure Sheila was occupied before he made his way to the back office. He dropped into the desk chair and ripped the envelope open. The fancy script announced his great-grandmother's birthday party. His great-grandmother, who he affectionately called Granny, was turning 100 years old on Christmas Day. The festivities would be held at the Montage, the most elite hotel in Baltimore. As soon as he'd finished reading the invite, his mobile phone buzzed. "Hello, Mason, you haven't gotten any help for your stutter yet?" He winced. His cousin Andrea's ugly words sliced through his soul like a machete. One reason why he'd stopped going to family events as an adult was because of his haunting memories. When he'd gone to a family reunion as a child, he'd overheard his malicious cousins making fun of his stutter. What made it even worse was Reese had joined in on the taunting. He pushed the unwelcome thoughts from his mind. "What do you want, Andrea? I have to talk to you." "About what? You got my invite to Granny's party, right?" "Yes. I just opened it. Are you coming?" "No." "But you have to come. Out of all her grandchildren, you're the closest to Granny. Besides, I already told her that you were coming and that you were baking her favorite chocolate peanut butter birthday cake. She would go and do that." He hated that about Andrea. This woman loved to take charge and give orders. When they were kids, she always had to be the one to orchestrate the games at the family reunions. It'd been years since he'd seen Andrea, and he wasn't eager to reconnect with her. Besides, the party was on Christmas Day. Didn't most of the other family members have plans, especially the ones who had children? Andrea always waited until the last minute to plan things. She simply got on his nerves. He'd already planned what he'd do for Granny's birthday. He'd planned on having 24 of her favorite red roses delivered to her nursing home in Baltimore. He'd then planned on paying her a nice long visit on Christmas Day. "Do you want to upset Granny? Just come to the party and bring the cake with you. I figure about 50 relatives will show up, so be sure to bring a big cake. Make sure you decorate it too." She sighed. "And don't forget to bring a date." Her soft laughter sounded through the phone. The command rattled his nerves. "No, I'm not coming." Unable to resist, he disconnected the call. A knock sounded on his door before Sheila breezed in. The floral scent of her perfume wafted toward his nose. Her hair was up in a cute bun, and she was wearing an apron emblazoned with a picture of a cat. He swallowed, tried to school his features. No way did he want her to know how upset he was. "Mason, what's wrong?" The question flew from her mouth like a cannon. Sheila focused on Mason. His mouth was mashed down, and his dark, chocolate-brown eyes appeared as if they were shooting sparks of anger. A cream-colored piece of paper was crumpled in his fist. He was obviously upset. But what could bother him in a few minutes? He'd been joyous all day. She'd even caught him studying her a few times, a grin teasing his full lips. His dark brown eyes had sparkled with warmth while he cut slabs of cake and frosted his Christmas cookies. Now, it looked like his good mood had evaporated, like steam rising from a cup of hot hazelnut coffee. She'd come back to ask him if they had any more cream. They'd run out, and she didn't see any extra in the refrigerator. "Mason?" She softened her voice as she came toward him. What do you want?" His deep voice was filled with dread, and he refused to look at her while he spoke. "Cream? I couldn't find any." He stood up and marched to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. He then pulled out a bin holding several cartons of milk and cream. He slammed the bin onto the counter. "Can't you find anything? It's right here in front of your face." He gripped the bin so hard that it appeared as if he were going to break the container. Well, he needed to find some other way to control his anger. No way was he going to talk to her like that. He was obviously upset and needed some space. She got into his face, ignoring how handsome he looked. "You need to calm down before you speak to me again. Maybe you need to go back into your office." She narrowed her eyes before removing the cream and returning to her duties. The nerve of that man! Her hand shook as she poured the cream into a container. Soon, cream spilled onto the counter and puddled onto the floor. What an awful mess! Groaning, she took a wad of paper towels and wiped up the mess. She certainly hoped Mason's dark mood improved soon. She didn't know how she'd continue working here if his mood remained as sour as curdled milk. Chapter 7. Wham! Mason slammed the ball with his racket. He'd been playing so long that the muscles in his arms ached. His friend and Pastor Isaac walloped the ball into the wall. Finally, their racquetball game ended. Mason dropped onto a bench and guzzled the water from his bottle. Isaac plopped down beside him. The older man's brown, bald head shined underneath the gym lights. He dropped his racket as he took a swig from his water bottle. His slightly gray eyebrows raised as he scrutinized his racquetball partner. Mason finished his water, leaned back against the wall, focused on the wide area of the racquetball court. "Why are you staring at me? Man, what's eating you? You're playing like you're mad at the world." "Nothing. It's got to be something." Isaac was so perceptive. Too perceptive. Mason had recently joined Blue Spring Community Church and had formed a friendship with the pastor. After the new member welcome at the church, he surprisingly hit it off with the older man. They'd discovered they had a lot in common and had gotten in the routine of playing racquetball together a few nights a week. Mason supposed that since Isaac was the pastor of Blue Spring Community Church, his profession enabled him to learn to read people's emotions. Well, Isaac was giving him an expectant look, as if he wanted him to confide all that was bothering him. Heck, he wasn't used to talking things through. He was used to dealing with his crises by himself. Mason found he preferred being a loner, but being with Isaac had proved to be a welcome reprieve. Maybe his friend could help him out. After taking a deep breath, he told Isaac about receiving the party invitation, Andrea's phone call, and his snapping at Sheila. "So, I'm not going to Granny's party." "Whoa, time out." Isaac continued to study Mason. "You should go to the party and bring the cake with you. You mentioned that you're close to your great-grandmother. She'll be pleased to see you, and she'll be glad that you made her favorite cake for her birthday. Don't stay away from the party to spite Andrea." "But I don't have a date." "So? What does that matter? You're just angry at Andrea because she riled you up with that comment. You don't have to bring a date. Just bring your cake and be sure you're there to honor your grandmother." Mason nodded. Hot shame filled his soul. He'd allowed his anger at Andrea to affect his actions. "Regarding Sheila, you can simply apologize to her if you haven't already done so." "I have, but she's still mad at me." "Women can be like that sometimes. Give her time to get over it." Isaac eyed Mason. "Are you sweet on her?" Mason raised his eyebrows. No way. Besides, she used to date Reese. So? When I came to pick up my cookie order at your bakery, I saw her looking at you. I think she likes you." "Could that possibly be?" "No way. Sheila wasn't attracted to him. If she was, she only liked him because he resembled Reese. Maybe you can ask her to be your date for the party." Mason shook his head. No, it's on Christmas Day. She probably already has plans. Besides, she was so pretty, he'd be too nervous to ask her. When he was nervous, his stutter got even worse. He'd probably get so tongue-tied that he wouldn't even be able to get the question out. "Can I ask you something? If it's too personal, just tell me to mind my own business." "Sure." He doubted Isaac would ask him anything upsetting. "Have you ever tried to get any help for your stutter?" He nodded. "Yes, but the speech therapist couldn't help. I was a kid. I had therapy a few more times, but they couldn't fix me." Isaac nodded, stared at the wall for several minutes, as if in deep thought. "Well, you could always try again with a different therapist." Try to get help with his stutter with another therapist? Mason contemplated that advice while he pulled out his cell phone. He texted Andrea, stating that he'd be coming to the party and he'd bring the cake. She texted back, "Thanks. Are you bringing a date?" He didn't answer her. There were some things that were better left unsaid. Sheila pulled into the parking lot of Sugar and Spice. It was lunchtime, and she'd had another job interview that morning. The company had seemed positive about hiring her, but she just needed to wait a few more days before she heard back with their decision. If she happened to receive a job offer before her trip to the state of Washington, then she'd be sure to let her prospective employer know that she had travel plans for the Christmas holiday. She grinned, warmth bubbling inside her like a geyser. This would be the best Christmas ever since she'd be seeing her father again. She turned her phone on and accessed her bank account. Her account had only had a few dollars in it until she'd started depositing her tip money each day. So far, she'd earned almost $100. No, that wasn't enough to purchase her plane ticket, but it was a great start. If she continued earning the great tips, then she'd have enough to purchase her plane ticket. Reese mentioned that payday was every 2 weeks. She'd only been working at Sugar and Spice for 1 week, so it'd be another week before payday. Her first paycheck would be something else that would help with buying the ticket. Her phone buzzed. It was her cousin Miriam. She answered the call. "Hi, Miriam. Are you okay?" "Yes. How many times are you going to ask me that?" "Well, I know this will be an emotional moment for you, going to see your dad at Christmas. I just wondered if you'd reconsidered." "Of course, it's an emotional time, but I can handle it. I'm worried about you, Sheila. Are you sure you don't want to talk to your mom about this?" Was she kidding? "Of course not. All my mom would do is discourage me from going. She might be able to give you some advice." Sheila narrowed her eyes. "You don't think I should meet up with my dad, do you?" The accusation flew from her lips. "I didn't say that. I just know how you look at things through rose-colored glasses sometimes. You see the good in everybody, not noticing their negative traits. Remember how long it took you to see that Reese wasn't a very nice person?" She took a few deep breaths. "Well, I finally found out. Only after he cheated on you, broke up with you, shattered your heart, and married another woman." Her heart pounded. She didn't want to talk about this anymore. "Why are you bringing this up now?" she asked in a small voice. "Because you're too kind-hearted for your own good. You dated Reese because you thought he needed you. You felt bad because he grew up without his dad around since his parents were divorced. You thought some kindness was what he needed to heal his tortured soul. But that's not true. Yes, it is, and you know it. You're just too stubborn to admit it to yourself. What's this got to do with my dad? Your mom always said your dad wasn't a very nice person. I don't think that. I have to go. My shift starts at the bakery, and I don't want to be late." She ended the call, slid her phone back into her purse. Tears rushed from her eyes while she glanced at the Christmas lights blinking from a nearby store. "Lord, help me through this holiday season." Her dad may have had some negative qualities, but he was a good dad while he was with her. She closed her eyes, again recalling the lunches she shared with her dad at his job. Those were some of her most cherished memories, and if her father hadn't made the mistakes he'd made, then she was sure they'd have had a solid relationship. They could still be close someday. They needed to get reacquainted first. Besides, the Lord would want her to forgive her dad, and that's what she was doing. She knew she was making the right decision. She finally got out of the car and made her way toward Sugar and Spice. Festive sugar cookies were on display, and a mother holding the hand of a toddler stopped to admire the festive treats in the window. Seeing the mother and child reminded her of her close relationship with Reese's son, Chris. She'd even imagined herself as Chris's stepmom. The entire time she'd dated Reese, she'd fantasized about marrying him, maybe having more children. Sadly, she figured that eventually Chris would forget about her. After all, she wasn't Chris's mother, and he'd soon bond with Reese's new wife. The haunting thought sliced through her soul. It was bad enough that she'd lost Reese, but to lose Christopher too? She peered through the window. Good, the shop wasn't crowded. The only customers were a group of people who'd recently made a purchase. They appeared to be admiring the Christmas tree. One of them held a sugar and spice monogrammed box. She could enjoy her lunch before she started her shift. The thought of eating peanut butter and jelly made her cringe. She was so tired of eating peanut butter and jelly, tuna fish, or bologna for lunch. Well, Mason didn't seem to mind when she ate his chocolate peanut butter cake for dessert. He was so generous with his sweets, and he told her she could eat whatever she wanted for free. Well, after she ate a slice of that cake, she'd feel better. Looking forward to the cake, she entered the bakery, and the sleigh bells above the door rang, announcing her arrival. The group of customers exited the bakery. Their laughter rang as they went outside into the frigid afternoon. She glanced at the table, noticing the chocolate crumbs lining the plates. Those happy customers must have had some of Mason's chocolate peanut butter cake. That cake always seemed to put people in a better mood. Mason came from behind the counter, looking apprehensive. Since he'd snapped at her, they'd been overly polite to one another. He'd apologized to her, and when she'd again asked what was wrong, he'd been silent. He'd then said he didn't want to discuss it. Well, he had a right to his privacy. But she missed the laughing camaraderie they'd shared during her first 2 days on the job. Maybe she needed to stop being so sensitive and understand that Mason had good and bad days, just as she did. She nodded toward him. "Hi. Do you mind if I eat my lunch before I start working?" No. Don't. Eat. Why? Yet. She raised her eyebrows. Excuse me? No way could she allow this man to dictate when she could eat. She was starving, and it would only take a few minutes for her to wolf down her peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a glass of milk. She'd only asked him the question as a courtesy. He rushed over to one of the empty tables and pulled out a chair. Have a seat. Curious, she put her coat away and sat in the empty chair. Mason was up to something, and she wondered what it was. He went into the back and returned with 2 subs wrapped in butcher paper. "I got these from the Blue Spring sub shop, her favorite." She'd been craving a sub for the last month, but hadn't wanted to spend any of her precious funds. She vaguely recalled telling Mason about her love of Blue Spring sub shop a few days ago, right before she'd gotten angry at him. She unwrapped the sub and sniffed. The scent of cold cuts and spices greeted her nose. The Italian sub was her favorite, and she grinned even more when she spotted the jalapeno potato chips. Her stomach rumbled, and her mouth watered. She dipped her head and silently said grace to Jesus, thanking him for this unexpected treat. Once she opened her eyes, she spotted the cola over ice that Mason placed before her. She bit into the sub. The cold cuts, cheese, herbs, and spices danced on her tongue. She enjoyed bite after bite, throwing some crunchy chips into her mouth while she ate. Once she'd finished her food, she realized that Mason had set a plate of his chocolate peanut butter cake in front of her. She dipped her head, giving him a warm smile. "Thanks." She sliced her fork into the moist, dark cake. The creamy peanut butter icing in the moist chocolate cake was like a symphony of flavor on her tongue. Her fork scraped against the plate as she tossed the last bite of cake into her mouth. Warmth spread through her body, and she sighed, full of contentment. The sweet cake was a wonderful end to an amazing meal. Mason grinned at her, his cute dimples winking. He'd already eaten his sub, and he was also enjoying a glass of soda. Don't worry about bringing Lil lunch anymore. I'll provide your lunch for you. I know how much you're tired of peanut, but butter and jelly and tuna fish. Oh, but you don't. He reached across the table and took her hand. I want to. It's my way of saying I'm sorry for yelling at you the other day. Whew, he'd snapped at her, and she'd gotten angry, and he was going to say he was sorry by providing lunch for her each day. She recalled something Tony had told her once after she'd been saved. If somebody does something kind for you, don't question it. Just accept it and thank God for the blessing. She dipped her head. Thank you. He nodded back. You're welcome. She eyed the crumbs of cake lining her plate. Mason went into the back and presented her with a second slice of cake. As she enjoyed the second slice, the sugar warmed her, making her feel glad. After she'd eaten her second slice, Mason took her dirty dishes into the kitchen before throwing away the remnants of their lunch. He sat beside her and she sighed, feeling so content. It was so nice to have a few moments alone with Mason, with no customers around. 1 week, that's how long she'd been working for Mason. He still proved to be a mystery to her, and she wanted to know more about him. He nodded toward her. Glad to see you're feeling better. Before you started eating, you looked pretty upset. Truth be told, she had been upset, but just eating a good meal with Mason lifted her spirits. He removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. The gesture reminded her so much of Reese. I've got a lot on my mind. This is probably the strangest Christmas in my life. She squeezed her fingers. Her hands still felt warm from Mason's touch. Her breath caught, and she swallowed. The subs, sodas, his warmth, and kindness. She enjoyed it, maybe a bit too much. Could it be true that she was actually developing feelings for Mason? Chapter 8. Mason put his glasses back on and paid close attention to Sheila. When she worried, she scrunched her eyebrows together, and sometimes she bit her lower lip. She seemed to have something on her mind constantly, and he'd been concerned about her. She'd been invading his dreams at night, too. Not only was Sheila beautiful, but she was kind. So kind and so lovely. There was a customer who came into the bakery regularly named Martha. Some of the townsfolk called her Crazy Martha. The woman was homeless, and when she'd first appeared in his shop, Sheila had rushed over to the woman, giving her a big hug. Sheila had also reprimanded the folks for calling Martha names. Whenever Martha came into the bakery, Sheila served her donuts and coffee. She'd then take money out of her tips to pay for the treats. He'd told Sheila not to worry about paying for Martha's food. Her meal was always on the house. He'd also heard that Sheila volunteered her time at the animal shelter every week. He wondered about her. What did she like to do in her spare time? Why was she always so worried? She'd once mentioned that this would be a strange Christmas, but he wondered why. When he'd asked her about it, she didn't give him any details. He again thought of asking her to be his date for Granny's party. No, he probably wouldn't be able to get the invite out of his mouth. He'd probably stutter for so long that Sheila would pity him. If she accepted his warped-sounding invite, it would probably be more out of obligation. She'd probably feel as if she should say yes just to show her gratitude for giving her a job. He again recalled what Isaac said about Sheila. He'd often caught Sheila observing him, but he highly doubted she liked him. She was probably just comparing him to Reese. Even though Reese had left her and gotten married to another woman, he had to wonder if she still had feelings for his brother. She'd been awfully upset that first day that they met in the bakery. She toyed with a napkin, scratched the back of her neck. Something was heavy on her mind. He might as well ask her about it. Why is this Christmas so strange for you? You never explained that to me. She shrugged her shoulders and sighed. I don't feel like talking about it. Okay. He could respect her not wanting to confide in him. After all, they didn't know each other very well. He finally left her alone, went into the back to start a special order of snowflake sugar cookies. He had a client that was coming by later to pick them up. He measured out the ingredients into the mixer. Minutes later, he quickly rolled out the cookies, questions about Sheila burning in his mind like an overbaked cake. Maybe she'd learn to confide in him once they got to know each other better. The sleigh bells rang and noise exploded into the bakery, interrupting Mason's thoughts. He dropped the rolling pin and rushed to the sitting area. A crowd of customers streamed in. There were at least 30 people. Several of them were dressed up, and some of the children wore their Sunday best. Then he remembered the cantata. He'd made the cookies for the cantata, but had forgotten about the crowds. Isaac had mentioned that Blue Spring would have a lot of visitors that afternoon for the Blue Spring Community Church Christmas cantata. The event drew in crowds from surrounding churches, and he'd mentioned that the crowds would come early to go shopping in Blue Spring and to see the Christmas tree on Main Street. Sheila scurried to the register. "Mason, I can't believe this crowd." She sliced pieces of chocolate cake and dumped them onto plates. Noise resonated in the room, and he could barely hear her over everyone's excited voices. Young preschool-aged children shrieked. Several of them toddled over to the Christmas tree in the corner of the room. I'll be back to help you." He rushed back into the kitchen and finished up the special-ordered cookies in record time. He set them out to cool. He'd frost them later. He then hurried back to the seating area. "Mason, we ran out of cupcakes. The cookies are almost gone, too." He eyed all of the guests. Several of them had to step outside to eat since all of the tables were taken. A man stood at the counter and tapped the tip jar. "Hey, your tip jar is full." The customer could barely speak while he shoved a donut into his mouth. He tried to place $1 into the full jar. Sheila stopped. Her eyes twinkled. "Mason, look at the tips." She took the jar and emptied it into a big canister before returning to her serving duties. Mason touched her shoulder. "That's great." He returned to the kitchen and started the batter for cupcakes and more cookies. He shoved the cupcakes into the oven, cooled and frosted them, made more cookies. He then brought the treats out for Sheila to serve to the customers. The warm sense of chocolate, sugar, and dough filled the air with fragrant sweetness. The smell surrounded him, making him feel good. He then helped top off coffee cups with his wonderful hazelnut coffee. Thank you, Jesus, for Sheila's help. Some of the patrons had questions about the desserts, and Sheila answered them quickly and efficiently. She even got a few special orders for Christmas cakes and pies to be made later that month. If he'd been at his bakery alone, he would have been overwhelmed answering so many questions from folks. His speech would have been garbled. His stutter would have gotten worse because he was rushed. The out-of-towners also wanted advice on where to shop. Sheila continued to expertly answer questions in her crisp, efficient manner as she cut slabs of cake and boxed up cookies. "Oh, there's a woman named Mildred who has the cutest antique store on Main Street. You should go there if you want a unique gift for Christmas." After he'd topped off coffee cups, he had to again rush to the kitchen to bake a batch of brownies. Apparently, they'd run out of those, too. As he brought the cooled brownies out from the kitchen, he studied Sheila again, emptying the overflowing tip jar into the large canister. A few hours later, he placed the closed sign on the door. Sweat rolled down his brow. He wiped the sweat from his face with a clean towel. Whew, that was the busiest day he'd ever had in his bakery. Sheila emptied the canister of tip money onto the table. Some of the coins spilled from the jar onto the floor. He rushed to the table and picked up the loose change and placed it beside her. She mumbled, counting the bills, placing them into a neat stack. She then focused on counting the coins. He estimated they'd had over 100 customers that afternoon. He didn't realize it was over an hour past closing time until the crowd had dwindled out. Sheila jiggled her leg as she finished counting the coins. Her grin had almost been contagious. He hurried into his office and returned to her table, sliding the check toward her. "Here's your paycheck." Her beautiful brown eyes widened. "But I thought payday wasn't for another week." Her fingers shook while she scrutinized the check. Today is payday. You'll get paid again in 2 weeks." She stood quickly, accidentally knocking her chair on the floor. She squeezed the check in her small fist. "That means I have enough money." Her lovely voice echoed with joy. "Enough money? For what?" Before he could manage to voice his thoughts, she hugged him. He breathed deeply, wrapping his arms around her warm, thin body. She smelled wonderful. like vanilla and wildflowers, and she fit into his arms nicely. He never wanted to let her go. He had no idea what she was excited about, but he was grateful for the hug. She released him. Her chocolate brown eyes sparkled, just like twinkling lights on a Christmas tree. The urge to kiss her shapely, ruby-red lips consumed him. He pushed the thought aside. He'd be content with the hug, for now, anyway. Chapter 9. This Christmas by Donny Hathaway blared from her car while she zipped down Main Street. Sheila eyed the Christmas lights twinkling from the store windows. She'd left the bakery 15 minutes ago, stunned that she'd actually hugged Mason. Hugging him had been relaxing, enjoyable, and so comforting. She'd enjoyed that hug a little bit too much. His muscular chocolate brown arms had soothed her. For one weird moment, she thought that he would kiss her. She'd been a bit disappointed when he hadn't. She supposed he was being cautious, and she couldn't blame him for that. She figured he'd be leery about being attracted to her since she used to date Reese. She pulled into the parking lot of the First National Bank. After she'd made her deposit at the ATM, she got back into her car, her heart pounding with joy. Not only was she excited about Mason's hug, but she was also excited about booking her airline ticket. She'd just deposited the funds from that day's tips, as well as her paycheck. Now, all she needed to do was transfer the funds from her account tomorrow to pay for her airline ticket. Lord, thank you for this blessing. She got back into her car and stopped at the Blue Spring Gymnasium. She hadn't been to the gym in weeks. Her belly felt pudgy from eating so many slices of Mason's chocolate peanut butter cake. She needed to start working off some of those extra calories she'd been consuming. After an intense workout on the treadmill and after lifting some weights, she took a long, hot shower. Afterwards, she changed into the dress she'd brought with her. That morning when she'd packed her gym bag, she'd decided to attend the Christmas cantata. The folks in Blue Spring usually dressed up when they attended that event. After she'd dressed and did her makeup, she drove slowly down Main Street. She approached the Blue Spring Community Church. She pulled into the crowded parking lot. The cantata music spilled from the closed church doors. She got out of her car and entered the church. The altar. Goodness, it was breathtaking. She stopped and placed her hand over her quivering lips. Joy exploded in her chest like 100 happy butterflies. Her mood lifted even higher while she feasted her eyes on the glorious sanctuary. The sills of stained glass windows were etched with greenery and pine cones. A large Christmas tree rested near the altar. A cross topped the tree and the white lights glowed amid multicolored ornaments. They must have decorated the church earlier that day. At last week's service, the church hadn't looked like this. She focused on the choir. Their red robes swayed as they sang Christmas hymns to the congregation. Sheila managed to find an empty seat in the back of the church. A few minutes later, someone tapped her shoulder. She looked up into Mason's handsome face. He wasn't wearing his glasses, and his dark brown eyes twinkled with warmth. He pointed to the seat, a silent question in his dark eyes. He couldn't believe it. He'd actually found Sheila at the cantata. He hadn't realized she'd be attending. He'd made the impromptu decision to attend earlier that evening. Sheila smiled, gestured toward the seat, and nodded. She looked beautiful. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her back in soft curls. Her chocolate brown eyes sparkled with warmth. She wore a nice red dress and black leather boots. He settled into the seat beside her. The delicate scent of her perfume wafted toward him. What would she do if he held her hand? Only one way to find out. He took her soft hand and held it, squeezed her slim fingers. He glanced down at their joined hands. Red polish dotted her fingernails. She squeezed his hand, and he squeezed hers back. Her small foot lightly tapped to the Christmas music. Festive songs filled the sanctuary. His heart pounded, and he felt as if he were going to explode with joy. Once the cantata was over, Pastor Isaac stepped up to the podium. His wise eyes scanned the crowd, and he smiled widely when he spotted him sitting with Sheila. We're going to close our cantata with a word of prayer. He couldn't believe it. He'd actually found Sheila at the cantata. He hadn't realized she'd be attending. He'd made the impromptu decision to attend earlier that evening. Sheila smiled, gestured toward the seat, and nodded. She looked beautiful. Her long dark hair cascaded down her back in soft curls. Her chocolate brown eyes sparkled with warmth. She wore a nice red dress and black leather boots. He settled into the seat beside her. The delicate scent of her perfume wafted toward him. What would she do if he held her hand? Only one way to find out. He took her soft hand and held it, squeezed her slim fingers. He glanced down at their joined hands. Red polish dotted her fingernails. She squeezed his hand, and he squeezed hers back. Her small foot lightly tapped to the Christmas music. Festive songs filled the sanctuary. His heart pounded, and he felt as if he were going to explode with joy. Once the cantata was over, Pastor Isaac stepped up to the podium. His wise eyes scanned the crowd, and he smiled widely when he spotted him sitting with Sheila. We're going to close our cantata with a word of prayer. Afterwards, we'll have punch and cookies in the reception hall. Mason didn't want to mingle with the crowd. He certainly didn't want to eat the cookies he'd baked earlier that day. He wanted to be alone with Sheila. Once Isaac was done with his prayer, Mason stood and helped Sheila with her coat. After he'd put his coat on, he gently led her outside. The Christmas lights decorating the outside of the church winked in the frosty night. He continued holding her hand, his heart filled with glee. "Have you eaten dinner?" She shook her head. "No. I was hoping you'd suggest getting something to eat." "I'm starved." She grinned, and a dimple winked from her left cheek. Do you mind walking? I know it's cold. I'm fine. This coat's warm enough." She pulled a knitted hat from her pocket and placed it on her head. She pulled some gloves from her pocket and hesitated. She put the gloves back into her pocket and slid her hand into his. They strolled through town. He made sure to slow his gait for her. She was so short that he doubted she could keep up with him if he walked quickly, as he usually did. Christmas lights flickered from the store windows, and greenery swirled around the lampposts. He stopped in the center of town as they approached the park. A crowd of people congregated around the massive Christmas tree. The full tree had bright, white lights cascading all around it. Glittering ornaments of doves, angels, and Christmas balls decorated the branches. "It sure is pretty." Puffs of white air escaped from her mouth as she spoke. Not half as pretty as you." The compliment slipped from his mouth. He just couldn't help telling her how he felt. Just being alone with a woman, holding hands, out on a cold Christmas season night was a rare event for him. It had always been so hard for him to approach women because of his blasted stutter. She glanced at him, her dark eyes startled. She then slowly grinned. It looked like she was pleased with his compliment, which was a good thing. "Thanks." He gestured across the street. "Pedro's for dinner?" Pedro's was an Italian pizzeria on Main Street. They had some of the best deep dish pizza he'd ever tasted. Hopefully Sheila enjoyed pizza. "I love Pedro's. It's one of my favorite restaurants." They crossed the street and entered the crowded restaurant. Diners' voices spilled into the foyer. They were soon seated at a corner booth. Festive lights twinkled from the velveteen walls and Christmas carols softly crooned from the stereo system. They ordered a sausage and mushroom pizza, salad, and sodas. His stomach grumbled with hunger and nervousness. He just couldn't believe he was out on a date with Sheila. This was a date, wasn't it? Their pizza arrived. The scent of tomatoes, garlic, and sausage surrounded him. He took her hand and bowed his head. "Lord, thank you for the wonderful gift of Sheila's company. Thank you for this food. Amen." He squeezed Sheila's hand. He then dished up portions of the hot pizza. Strings of cheese dripped from the sides as he slid the pizza onto their plates. They ate in silence. The delicious, hot, cheesy pizza tasted good. Hot pizza turned out to be a perfect choice for a cold night. Mason, there's so much I don't know about you. He didn't know much about her either, but he was willing to learn. He wanted to know everything about Sheila Parks. What did you want to know? How did you become a baker? She wanted to know how he became a baker? That would take him a long time to tell, especially with his stutter. He'd again recalled Pastor Isaac's advice. He'd decided to do something about his stutter. He wanted to get rid of it. He knew how hard it was for people to listen to him speak. My dad didn't want me to become a baker. Your parents are divorced, right? Reese told me that you didn't see your father much. He nodded. Reese had told her the truth about their dad. He never approved of me. He always favored Reese. She stopped eating, her dark brown eyes serious. So you don't have a good relationship with your dad either? I know Reese said that his relationship with your dad wasn't very good. He nodded. That's true, but Reese's got along with Dad a little bit better than I. He continued telling her about their childhood. He mentioned that when Reese wanted to become a veterinarian, their dad had been ecstatic. At first, my dad refused to pay for my education because I wanted to become a baker. So, after you graduated from high school, you studied to become a baker? No. I went to college, earned my bachelor's degree in business administration, just like my dad wanted me to do. He wiped his greasy hands on a napkin, recalling his college years. After calling college, I got a job and I hated it. I've always loved baking, and my dad knew that, but never approved of my passion. She stopped eating and looked directly at him. So, what did you do? Granny made him see that he was wrong to do that. So, after one conversation with your grandmother, your father agreed to pay for your education at cooking school? He shook his head. No, it was after several conversations. My dad was shocked when I got into Le Cordon Bleu in Paris. Sheila gasped, placed her hand over her beautiful lips. You went to Le Cordon Bleu? Really? My friend Tony mentioned that school to me. It's one of the most prestigious cooking schools. He nodded, secretly pleased that he'd impressed her. After I got in, a lot of my father's rich friends were impressed about my profession. My dad stopped complaining after that. She took a hearty bite of pizza, glanced around the restaurant before focusing on him again. What was it like studying in Paris? Did you date a lot of French women? He laughed. No, too busy studying. I liked Paris. I'd like to go back and visit sometime. Joy filled his soul. He leaned toward her. If I go back to visit, maybe you can come with me. She stopped eating and grinned. Well, I don't know about that. I'm flat broke right now. It'll be a long time before I can afford a trip to Paris. He nodded. He figured he could wait to see what happened between them as time went on. He didn't know what was going to happen when she found a job. He'd be happy for her, since she needed a job to survive. Yet he knew he'd miss seeing her pretty face every day. How did you happen to own your own bakery? You ever heard of a hotel called the Golden Swan in Baltimore? Yeah, that place is elegant and expensive. I was the head pastry chef there. Lots of folks said my pastries were the best. People were always telling me I should start my own business. So Reese suddenly got married and left, offered you his building, and you accepted his offer. He shook his head. Not exactly. When our Reese approached me, I'd been thinking and praying about this for over a year. Sheila, whenever I make a big decision, I always talk to God about it. She nodded. Sometimes I talk to God when I'm alone. I have conversations with him. You mean praying? She shrugged. Yes, I pray to God, but I'll just talk to him sometimes. You know, the way you talk to a friend. But I speak to him out loud. Like, when Tony moved to Chicago, I kept saying aloud, Lord, I'm happy for Tony, but why'd she have to move so far? I miss her. I talk to him out loud when I'm alone so much that I could imagine someone thinking I was crazy. He touched her hand. I don't think you are crazy. It's nice to have a deep relationship with Jesus. He continued telling her about his relocation to Blue Spring. Reese knew about my plans to open my own bakery. He offered to let me purchase his building, and I accepted. I'd researched it and knew about Shades of Chocolate, the bakery that used to be in my building. I figured opening a bakery in Blue Spring would be lucrative. She nodded. She seemed to be interested in what he told her, and that was a good thing. After they'd eaten, he paid their bill, got their coats, and soon they were outside in the frigid night. They slowly strolled back to the church. When they approached her car, he leaned toward her and kissed her cheek. Chapter 10. Mason's warm, firm lips made her heart pound. She took his hand. Thanks for a wonderful evening. He nodded, his dark eyes warm and inviting. She got into her car and glanced in her rearview mirror as she drove away. He watched her while she drove down the street. Minutes later, she pulled into her driveway. What a wonderful evening that was. Mason's kiss played through her mind like a non-stop movie. She got out of her car and made her way toward the front door. She unlocked her door and opened it, flipped her light switch. Nothing happened. She flipped it again. She jerked around. All of the houses on her street had their outside lights on. Christmas lights twinkled from the homes. Maybe she needed to reset her breaker or something. After going downstairs and restarting her breaker, she realized that her lights wouldn't come back on. Tom meowed in the darkness. She picked him up, and by candlelight, she fed him his meal. She took the lit candle and searched through her overdue bills. The last electric bill that she'd received had been bright red, and the notice had stated that they'd turn off her lights if they hadn't received payment by a certain date. She'd received the overdue bill the same day that she'd received her father's letter. Lord, how in the world could I have forgotten about this? She'd been so focused on making enough money to go visit her dad that she'd ignored her most important bill. She took her phone and called the electric company's after-hour emergency number printed on the back of the envelope. Electric company, may I help you? My lights have been turned off, and I need to pay my bill. Do you have a credit card? She didn't have any available credit left on her card. No, I'm afraid not. What's your address? Sheila recited her address. The woman on the line typed for a few minutes. Do you want to know how much you owe? Sheila ripped open the envelope that contained her bill. She recited the amount due. Oh no, dear, you owe a reactivation fee too. The woman typed a bit more before reciting her amount due. Sheila's heart pounded when she realized how much she now owed. Oh Jesus, please help me. I beg your pardon. I'm just surprised. If you don't have a credit card, you'll need to come downtown tomorrow with the cash or a money order to pay. Sheila disconnected the call and slumped into a chair. Tom continued to crunch on his food. Well, at least Tom was happy. Right now, misery consumed her. The amount due, plus the reactivation fee, would wipe out the money she'd saved to purchase a plane ticket to see her dad. Sheila had been upset over the last few days. He had no idea what was wrong with her. After their date at the pizza parlor, he'd thought that they'd made some strides in getting to know one another. After all, he'd told her a lot of things that she didn't know about him. Then he'd kissed her cheek. Her smooth cheek had felt as soft as warm butter beneath his lips. As she'd went through the last few days like a robot, wiping down tables, taking orders from customers, her pretty mouth had drooped. At times, he'd found her mumbling to herself. He wasn't sure if she were trying to figure something out, or if she were praying, or what. She'd mentioned talking aloud to the Lord, so maybe she had a problem, and she needed to openly discuss it with Jesus. He'd made an appointment to see a speech therapist. Hopefully, with some time and effort, he'd be able to ask her to be his date for Christmas without stuttering. Well, the first thing he needed to do was make her smile. A large bunch of customers had just cleared out. They probably had about an hour of quiet time for lunch before they saw any more patrons. She removed the broom from the corner and swept the floor. Her thin arms moved quickly with the movement, as if she were working off anger. A food delivery man rushed into the bakery holding 2 bags of food. The scent of the grilled steaks filled the small sitting area. "Hi." He met the man as soon as he'd entered. He'd ordered filet mignon with mashed potatoes from the steakhouse for their lunch. The steakhouse didn't deliver meals, but he'd spoken to the owner that morning and had made arrangements for them to deliver the food. Sheila seemed to appreciate the meals he provided, and he was glad to do something to make her smile. He paid the man, and the deliverer rushed from the bakery. The sleigh bells jingled above the door when he exited. Sheila replaced the broom, her dark eyes assessing the bags of food. "Smells wonderful in here. You've been working hard all day. Sit down and have Debbie lunch." She plopped down in the chair. As soon as he opened the bags and placed the steaks and mashed potatoes on their plates, she smiled a little. "I love steak. Is it well done?" He nodded. After he said grace, they enjoyed their meal. The tender, juicy steak was flavorful and delicious, and the fluffy mashed potatoes had just the right amount of salt and butter. They washed their meal down with glasses of cold soda. After they were finished, Sheila stood, about to go into the back to get pastries to refill the displays. He took her hand, halting her exit. "Let's talk." She frowned and plopped back into the seat. "What's wrong?" "I don't want to talk about it. I thought we were friends." She sighed and massaged her forehead. Do you have a headache?" "No, I'm just upset and worried." "About what?" "I'm having financial problems." That's why she was upset. That made no sense. She'd been having financial problems since she'd been unemployed. That's partially why he'd been providing her lunch for her. He knew how much she dreaded eating mac and cheese and ramen noodles. He recalled her joy the night of the cantata. Right before she'd left work, she'd been excited, claiming that she'd had enough money for something. "What happened the night of the cantata? You said you had enough money for something? You were happy." Hopefully, going out with him didn't put her in a bad mood. He was pretty good at guessing her emotions, and as far as he could tell, she'd been happy at the end of their pizza date. "It's kind of personal." "Well, whenever you want to talk about it, then let me know." He'd leave her alone. He certainly wasn't going to beg her to confide in him. He thought about something else. "What are you doing for Christmas?" She shook her head. "Nothing. This will be the first Christmas in my life that I don't have any plans. I usually spend Christmas with my mom, but she's going on a long cruise. She's leaving tomorrow and won't be back until sometime after Christmas." She didn't have any plans for Christmas. Thank you, Jesus. Now he'd be able to ask her to be his date for Granny's party. Mason pulled into the parking lot of the Blue Springs speech pathologists. His steak lunch with Sheila earlier that day made him even more eager to get rid of his stutter. He'd been thinking and praying about his terrible stutter since he'd met her. Isaac's advice constantly echoed in his mind. He shouldn't let his childhood experiences with the speech therapist prevent him from trying again. Good thing he'd made this appointment. "Lord, please let this speech therapist help me to speak properly." He again recalled Andrea's text, asking if he'd be bringing a date to Granny's party. He sighed. He wanted to bring Sheila, but he didn't want to foul things up when he asked her. But if seeing this speech pathologist helped him, then he might go ahead and bite the bullet and ask her. Getting rid of his stutter and asking a pretty woman out on a date, doing those two things were symbolic of his moving forward with his life. He got out of his car and strolled into the office. Large green potted plants rested near the window, and a blonde receptionist sat at the front desk. She gave him a warm smile. "Can I help you?" "I have a 4:30 appointment." She nodded. "Okay, you're Mason?" He nodded. "Fill out these forms, and the pathologist will be with you shortly." He accepted the clipboard and began filling out the forms. Thank God he'd been able to snag an appointment at 4:30 after the bakery was closed. Sure, Sheila was able to watch the bakery on her own for an hour, but he didn't feel like explaining why he'd be gone. Once the forms were completed, he returned the clipboard to the receptionist. He then dropped back into the chair. He took deep breaths, his leg jiggled while he waited for the doctor. Lord, help me with this session. The door opened and the doctor breezed into the reception area. She gave him a warm smile and offered her hand. I'm Dr. Benson. I'm Mason. They shook hands and she gestured toward her office. Come and let's get started. He followed her into the office and made himself comfortable in a chair. She glanced through the papers he'd recently filled out. I see you've had speech therapy before. He nodded. But it didn't work. How old were you? 6. An entire year of therapy, and his stutter hadn't gotten any better. Hopefully, things would work out better this time, Lord willing. Also, a few more times when I got older. But they couldn't help me. She placed his papers into a manila folder and leaned toward him. Well, Mason, I hope I can help you. As long as you're willing to listen and do as I advise, I think you'll be pleased with the results. He nodded. Hopefully, Dr. Benson knew what she was talking about. Chapter 11. Sheila polished off a slice of chocolate peanut butter cake. The warmth from the sugar zinged through her. But she didn't feel as good as she usually did after eating Mason's special treat. She eyed the empty plate. It had been a few days since Mason had asked her to confide in him. She still hadn't told him about her dad. Hot shame filled her soul when she told him she didn't want to talk about it. He'd seemed hurt, and that bothered her. Mason was so kind, she was sure he'd offer to pay for her plane ticket. But she just didn't want to be indebted to another person. She should probably tell him something. She cleared her throat as she approached him. He pulled a pan of bell-shaped sugar cookies from the oven. The intoxicating scent of vanilla and butter filled the small space. She then recalled that a special order had been placed for the treats. He set the hot pan on the counter and turned toward her. His mesmerizing dark eyes pierced right into hers, as if he could see into her very soul. He paused and opened his mouth, but he didn't speak. He'd been doing that over the last few days, not speaking as much. He'd pause, almost as if he had to think about what he had to say. He cleared his throat. You okay? He didn't stutter. That was something else she'd noticed over the last few days. Yeah, he stuttered when he said complete sentences, but before he spoke, he seemed to stop and concentrate. And if he said one or two words, his deep voice came out in a slow drawl. She figured he'd been self-conscious about his stutter. She didn't know how he'd react if she told him that she'd noticed his speech had improved a little bit. Perhaps he'd been going to therapy? No way could she ask him about that, at least not yet. He raised his thick eyebrows as if awaiting her response. Thanks for being so concerned about me. I've got a lot going on in my life. She bit her lower lip, pulled up a stool. Dang. This was so hard to talk about, but Mason had been so nice and kind to her. She felt that she at least owed him some sort of explanation. He nodded, and she sensed that he was really paying attention to her. He poured each of them a cup of coffee and sat next to her on another stool. He didn't speak. He just sipped his coffee, patiently waiting for her to explain herself. She licked her lips. Lord, give me strength. I haven't seen my father since I was 7. He looked up at her, opened his mouth, and then closed it. He finally opened his mouth again. What happened? So much had happened. My dad was sentenced to 20 years in prison when I was 7. It was drug-related. He's getting out soon and, well, just the thought of seeing him again is driving me a little crazy. I love my dad, and I want us to rekindle the relationship we had. There, she'd said it. Mason sipped his coffee. He remained silent for so long that she wondered if he was going to say anything. So sorry, you had to go through that. He took her chin, tilted her face toward his. You're not telling me everything. How the heck did he know that she was leaving out the part about the airline ticket? She supposed he figured she'd had a drastic mood swing since the Christmas cantata, and there had to be some other details she was skipping. Well, she wasn't going to tell him about the funds she needed for her flight. She supposed she'd visit her dad after Christmas, even though he desperately wanted to see her before Christmas Day. That's all I feel comfortable telling you right now. You haven't written to your dad or anything since he went to prison? Not until recently. Why not? My mom didn't let me. As an adult, well, I'm not sure why. He reached out to me first. Mason, even though he made his mistakes, he was the best dad. I have so many good memories of him. While he frosted the cookies, she told him about the root beer floats she used to share with him at his job. He was proud of me, and that meant a lot. Mason nodded, paid attention to every word she said. After she was finished sharing her special memories with him, he'd frosted the last cookie. He closed his eyes for a few seconds before speaking. Did you tell your mom? Her face heated, and she looked away from him. He sounded just like Miriam right now. Well, she might as well tell him the truth. No. Why not? Because her mom would object, that's why. She'd bad-mouthed her father since he'd been hauled off to prison. Her mom hated her father, literally, and she didn't think her mom would understand why she wanted to see her father so desperately. I don't want to. That's why. Her voice wavered. Good grief, she was getting upset. The sleigh bells rang from the front. A customer had arrived. I have to go wait on the customers, she mumbled before escaping to the front of the shop. They'd had a mad rush in the bakery after she'd confided to Mason. She'd boxed up so many Christmas cookies, cakes, and pastries. Christmas music crooned from the Wi-Fi speakers, making her feel a little better. Let it snow. She placed the close sign on the door, while Mason hummed from the back. She then gathered the dirty dishes. Amidst the rush that afternoon, she'd caught Mason openly observing her, and there was a question in his dark eyes. She figured he wanted to continue the discussion they'd had earlier. He probably had a lot that he had to say, but he probably figured that she found the entire subject to be upsetting. Mason approached from the kitchen and removed his apron and wiped sweat from his brow. I have to go. CCC, could you lock up? He furrowed his brow, peered into her eyes. You okay? Still mad about what I said? No, she wasn't mad. Just a bit unsettled that he didn't encourage her to meet up with her dad after all these years. After all, didn't the Lord want people to forgive one another? Jesus would want her to reach out to her dad, be there for him as soon as he got out of prison. I'm okay, Mason. We can finish our discussion later. I have some more things to say to you about your father. I didn't have time earlier. He pulled her into his arms. I care about you. I don't want you to get hurt again. He said the words in her ear, his breath fanning against her cheek. When he released her, his eyes locked with hers. Was he going to kiss her again? He fingered her cheek. So, can you lock up? He pressed the keys into her hand. She nodded. Okay, sure. He'd removed his apron, and it looked like he'd changed his clothes. He sported a nice red sweater and blue jeans. He smelled heavenly. She glanced at the clock. 4:25. She had to wonder where he was going, dressed so nicely. She barely had time to think about it before Mason pulled on his coat. He stopped at the partially open door, hesitating. His dark eyes met hers. I wanted to ask you something. Snowflakes spilled into the bakery. Her heart skipped. It's snowing! She joined him at the door, and soft flakes whirled around her face. She hadn't realized they were calling for snow. It rarely snowed in Blue Spring over the holidays. Seeing the snow cheered her up a little bit. She focused on Mason. What did you want to ask me? Sheila squealed as soon as she spotted Miriam rushing down the street in the whirling snow. Miriam bumped into Mason, attempting to enter the bakery. Sorry, we're closed. He gestured toward the closed sign. Miriam grinned, gestured to Sheila. I'm Sheila's cousin, Miriam. Is it okay if I talk to her? Mason's dark eyes sparked with curiosity as he eyed Miriam. Sure, I've got to go. He eyed Miriam again before going out into the swirling snow. Miriam breezed further into the bakery. She sported a thick, full-length coat and snow boots. Bright red lipstick coated her lips and a scarlet hat covered her dark hair. Snowflakes settled onto her long lashes. "Miriam, it's so good to see you." She pulled her into her arms. Miriam towered over Sheila. Her light-skinned, beautiful cousin was so tall and chic that she reminded Sheila of a model. Miriam returned her embrace, wrapping Sheila in her thin arms. She then released her and studied Mason rushing down the street. She removed her gloves and rubbed her hands together. "Was that Mason?" "Yes, that's Reese's twin brother." So many questions buzzed through Sheila's mind about Miriam's unexpected visit that she didn't even know where to start. "He's cute." Sheila didn't feel like talking about Mason right now. "What are you doing here? Why do you think?" "I drove down here to see you. You ignored my last 2 phone calls, and I just wanted to be sure you were okay." "Okay?" "Yeah, I know I hurt your feelings and I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said those things to you. It was wrong of me to imply that you shouldn't see your dad." She shrugged. "Besides, it's none of my business anyway." Sheila grinned. She hadn't seen Miriam in months, so it was wonderful to see her again. "You drove 2 hours just to see if I was okay, and to say you're sorry?" "Yep, I sure did. I even brought some clothes to spend the night." "What about Rachel?" Rachel was Miriam's daughter. "She's at a sleepover tonight, at a friend's house, so I'm free for the entire evening." She leaned toward Sheila. "Where was Mason going?" "I don't know." She quirked her brow and glanced around the bakery. "What do you mean you don't know?" Sheila told her about Mason's unexplained exit. "He doesn't tell me everything." "You sound upset about that." She shrugged. "Look, I was just getting ready to lock up." She went behind the counter, took a slice of the chocolate peanut butter cake, and served it to her cousin. "Taste this. It's probably the best cake you've ever tasted." Miriam raised her eyebrows. "Better than mine?" Miriam prided herself on the baked goods she made in her own bakery. "Yes." "Are you serious?" "Just eat the cake." After Sheila had cleaned up, washed the dishes, and swept the floor, Miriam had polished off the entire slice of cake and had drunk a carton of milk. "Girl, you're not kidding. That cake is wonderful. What's Mason's secret ingredient?" "You know, good cooks don't share their secrets." Miriam giggled as they put on their coats, and Sheila removed the keys from her pocket. "I have to volunteer at the animal shelter tonight. You can come with me if you want." Miriam shrugged. "Sure." Sheila locked the door and started her journey to the animal shelter. Miriam followed in her car. She had to drive slowly amidst the falling snow, not wanting to cause an accident. She finally pulled into the parking lot of the animal shelter. Miriam joined her at the shelter's front door, and Sheila pushed the door open. The scent of dry dog food and animals greeted her nose as soon as she walked in. The echo of barking dogs filled the large room. "Hey, Sheila." Norman, one of their youth volunteers, approached her. "Hi, Norman. This is my cousin Miriam." Miriam smiled at Norman as they shook hands. Norman gestured toward the back. "Could you come back here? I wanted to show you something." Sheila and Miriam went into the back room. Sheila squealed when she spotted the litter of puppies in the basket. "Oh!" She lifted one of the pups. The puppy's soft squeals filled the room. She glanced at Miriam, realized her cousin observed her while she cradled the pup. Miriam then glanced at Norman and gestured toward the pups. "Where is the mother?" "Good question. We don't know. Someone found the pups abandoned at the side of the road. They just brought them in a few minutes ago." Sheila's breath caught as she cradled the warm pup. Tears rushed to her eyes. She swiped the tears away. How could someone be so cruel as to leave these innocent pups in the cold? She looked directly into the pups' dark eyes. "We'll take good care of you. They've already been fed? The doctor's already been in to see them?" "Doctor's coming in tomorrow." He checked his watch. "Excuse me, I've got some stuff I need to do." He glanced at Miriam. "Nice meeting you." Miriam nodded, smiling at him. "Likewise." Miriam accompanied her as she went from cage to cage, giving each dog and cat their portion of food. She then went outside into the frigid evening, walking the dogs for a few minutes before replacing them in their cages. Once they'd left the shelter, Miriam glanced at the half-inch of snow covering the ground. Oh, the snow stopped. She sounded like she wished it had kept snowing. It sure is pretty, isn't it? Sheila glanced around the downtown area, admiring the Christmas lights that twinkled in the frigid, snowy night. The wind blew, blowing stray flakes of snow into the air. She closed her eyes, opened her mouth, and let a few flakes of snow into her mouth. She finally focused on Miriam. "I figure you're hungry for dinner, but I'm afraid I don't have much to offer for a meal. I have boxed mac and cheese, tuna fish, or egg salad. How about we order a pizza? I'll treat." The thought of a hot, cheesy pizza in the midst of a cold, snowy day sounded wonderful. After they'd arrived at her house, gotten settled in, Sheila ordered the pizza from Pedro's Pizza Parlor. Once it had been delivered, Miriam paid the delivery man, and the twosome sat at the table and enjoyed their simple meal. As they guzzled ice-cold Cokes and hot pizza, Sheila's mood lifted a little. Afterwards, they made themselves comfortable on the couch. Sheila turned on some Christmas music, and it softly played in the background. She then plugged in her Christmas tree and held Tom in her lap. She glanced at Miriam, realized her cousin was scrutinizing her. "What?" She rubbed Tom's soft fur and glanced at the Christmas tree. "Why are you staring at me?" "Just trying to figure you out." She shrugged. "What do you mean? You really like helping stray animals, don't you?" "Of course I do. You already knew that about me. I've been volunteering at the shelter for years." "Yeah, but it's almost like you're on a mission to make somebody feel better. You don't want those abandoned animals to feel neglected." She narrowed her eyes, glanced at her cousin. "What's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with caring for an abandoned animal." Miriam held up her hands. "Hey, don't get defensive." She softened her features, forced herself to relax. "Sorry, I was just thinking about our last phone conversation. I didn't know if you were going to insult me about something." "I don't mean it as an insult, but more like an observation." "An observation?" "Yeah, you'd told me that Reese didn't have a very loving childhood. You'd said his parents got divorced when he was young, and both his mom and dad were workaholics." "So?" "Well, I just don't want you to make the same mistake twice. Mason is a good-looking man, plus, he looks exactly like Reese. Both of them are from the same childhood." "So, why didn't Miriam just get to the point?" "I just don't want you to like Mason just because you feel sorry for him. You might think he needs you." "Don't be ridiculous." She mashed her mouth down, but Miriam's words made her pause. She scooped up Tom and fiddled with his ear, stroked his silky black fur. "I'm not being ridiculous, and you know it. After your daddy went to prison, your mom pampered you and taught you that those who were hurting hadn't had enough love in their lives. Your mom taught you to minister to those who were hurt or broken, and you seem to carry that same attitude into your relationships." Tom yowled and hurled out of her arms. She'd been holding him too tight. She tended to do that when she was upset. Seeming to sense that she wanted to be alone, Miriam went into the bathroom to take a shower. Sheila walked over to the window and stared out the window. The houses were frosted with snow, and Christmas lights winked in the inky blackness. The home across the street had a huge blow-up snowman out front, swaying in the frigid wind. Although Miriam could be a pain at times, she was usually right. When she'd been in high school, she'd gone to the prom with one of the most unpopular boys in the school because she'd felt sorry for him. His acne-coated face and gangly stance did nothing to endear him to the student body. Plus, he'd been the nerdiest kid in their class. In college, every guy she'd dated always had a sad tale to share about his life. As she thought about it, she'd sometimes felt that she was helping them with their issues, and she loved when they'd confided to her about their problems. Reese had been the same. He'd been sad and neglected as a child, plus, she felt he'd needed her to help with his son. She dropped the curtain and paced around the living room. With Mason, she didn't feel as if he really needed her, did she? Mason was kind, nice, and handsome. She loved being with him, and when he'd kissed her, her skin had heated from his touch. She'd wanted him to kiss her on the mouth. He dominated her thoughts, and she honestly didn't know what to do about it. She suddenly recalled that he'd wanted to ask her something earlier. She wondered what he'd been about to ask her when they were interrupted by Miriam. Chapter 12. Turtle Talk. Turtle talk, turtle talk. Mason rushed down the dark, snow-covered sidewalk, recalling the advice of the speech therapist he'd been seeing over the past week. She'd agreed to multiple sessions within a week. She'd told him that he needed to speak slowly, think about his sentences before he voiced his thoughts. She called this method of speaking turtle talk. He continued down the street, quickening his steps. He'd had a sleepless night, realized he needed to move forward with his plan to bring a date to Granny's birthday party. Whenever he had a sleepless night, he found that exercise helped him to relax. Instead of driving to the bakery that morning, he figured a good brisk walk would help him to calm down. His feet continued to plop against the snow-covered pavement. It had been so cold the previous evening that the half-inch of snow they'd gotten had failed to melt. His foot hit an icy patch, and he slipped, slamming into the brick wall of the bakery, banging his back. Sparks of hot pain shot up his back, and he groaned, flailed on the sidewalk. The bakery's outside light flicked on. "Mason!" Sheila leaned over him. Her long, dark hair tumbled forward, tickling his face. This was the first time he'd seen her with her hair down while in his bakery. "Let me help you up." She offered her hand, and he stood up. Ouch! Pain shot up his back when he moved. He groaned, leaned against the building. Sheila was so short and slim, he doubted she could help brace his weight while going into the bakery. "Jesus Christ, please help me with this pain." He gritted his teeth together, using the wall and Sheila's hand for support as he finally made his way into the bakery, hunched over. He dropped into a chair, and Sheila went into the kitchen and returned with ice, wrapped in a sandwich bag. "Here, you might need this. Where does it hurt?" His back hurt. He resisted using the curse words from his youth. Sweat popped on his brow. "My back hurts." Her dark eyes were sympathetic while she looked at him. She finally managed to remove his coat. Her cool, gentle fingers felt nice when they accidentally brushed the back of his neck. He leaned across the table, and she rested the ice pack on his lower back. "Thank you." The ice numbed the searing pain. He swallowed, felt like he owed her an explanation about his back. "It's an old sports injury from college. The pain rears up whenever I fall or bang into something. Do you need me to do anything?" He nodded. "We need to close the bakery today. I can keep it open myself." He shook his head. "It's not that I don't think you can do it, but I never showed you how to make any of my recipes." Whew, what a mouthful. His blasted stutter was back in full force. Amidst the pain and the thoughts of closing the bakery, he'd forgotten to focus and use his turtle talk. She nodded, her dark hair spilling over her shoulders. "Okay, I understand." He took a deep breath. Since he didn't drive here, he really needed her help. No way would he be able to walk home. Whenever he got one of these blasted back injuries, it always took at least 2 days to completely heal. It helped if he could get some pain medicine. "Could you take me to the urgent care center?" "Sure." After she'd posted a note on the door stating they'd be closed for the day, she offered him her hand. He figured it would be a bit of a struggle to help him to her car. Hours later, Sheila pulled into Mason's driveway. He'd given her his address, and she'd used the GPS on her phone to drive to his house. His home was a small, simple, one-story house. The sun had come out and melted the snow. Mason seemed much more relaxed after he'd seen the doctor and gotten some pain medication into his system. He managed to get out of the car, and she rushed to his side. She removed their bags of McDonald's from the back seat. He used her hand for support as she assisted him to his door. He unlocked the door and she followed him inside. After they'd feasted on Big Macs, fries, and drinks, she plugged in the heating pad for his back, made sure he was comfortable on the couch. The doctor said, to alternate between heat and cold packs. It was the best way to reduce the pain. Mason removed his glasses, placed them on the nearby coffee table, and closed his eyes. He breathed deeply, as if he were sleeping. She wondered if the pain medication made him tired. Mason, I guess I'll leave now. Truth be told, she didn't want to leave. She wanted to sit here with Mason, get him what he needed. They'd just finished lunch, but what would he do for dinner? He certainly couldn't cook. She was just plain worried about him, and she wanted to make sure he was okay. She could tell by the pinched set to his face while they were driving to urgent care that he'd been in great pain. When they'd initially arrived at urgent care, the center had been closed. They'd had to wait a few hours for them to open. Then they'd had to stay so that the doctors could take x-rays and examine Mason. The center had been short-staffed that day, so it had taken them a while to release him. No, please. Just stay for a little while. Wow. He really wanted her to stay. She breathed deeply, relishing the warm feeling that flowed through her. Since he was taking up the entire couch, she had to sit in the reclining chair across the room. No, she didn't want to sit there. She wanted to sit right here beside Mason. She glanced at his hand. She wanted to hold his hand, but didn't know if he'd object. The manly scent of his cologne filled her nose. Oh, how she'd fantasized about being held in those strong, muscular arms again. She still wondered what he was going to ask her when Miriam breezed into the bakery the previous day. He'd seemed apprehensive and nervous. She swallowed as a haunting thought crossed her mind. Perhaps he was going to ask her not to work in the bakery anymore. Could that possibly be? Perhaps he'd found someone he felt was more suited for that job. His deep, even breathing filled the room. Well, she might as well satisfy her curiosity. Mason? She whispered his name, not wanting to awaken him if he were truly sleeping. He slowly opened his eyes. He smiled, showing his perfect white teeth. Yes? Right before my cousin Miriam visited yesterday, you were about to ask me something. What was it? His smile faltered, and his Adam's apple bobbed when he swallowed. He closed his eyes, and his deep, even breathing filled the room. Had he fallen back to sleep? Well, he needed his rest, and she didn't want to wake him up. He cleared his throat, and his eyes popped open. She smiled, glad to see he was awake after all. I thought you'd fallen asleep. He barely acknowledged her words, stared at the wall for a few seconds. He reached over and took her hand. Her heart skipped. She took a deep breath, tried to calm herself down. I was praying. He spoke slowly, as if it pained him to say the words. He had to pray before he told her about what he'd been meaning to ask her yesterday. Why? She figured he needed some help. Okay. Did you want to talk to me about it later, when you're feeling better? He shook his head. No, He swallowed, and his Adam's apple bobbed. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, cleared his throat again. Christmas. He was making no sense. Maybe his medication was making him act weird. She squeezed his hand. What about Christmas? He hesitated before looking directly into her eyes. Are you busy on Christmas Day? Whoa, she hadn't been expecting that. Plus, he'd said an entire sentence without stuttering. He wanted to spend Christmas Day with her. Warmth poured into her soul. Mason wanted to spend one of the most blessed days of the year with her. How cool was that? You're busy? His dark eyes remained locked with hers. She'd been silent for a while, surprised at his question. She'd planned on meeting her dad on the 22nd if she ever found the money for the plane ticket. The rate was still locked in. But if she didn't come up with the funds the day after tomorrow, then the ticket would no longer be available. She'd simply have to wait until after the holidays to see her father. She'd planned on returning to Blue Spring after Christmas, but so much hinged upon her getting the funds for her ticket. She'd broken down and asked Miriam for the money before she left early that morning. Miriam had told her no. Her cousin had tears in her eyes, as she'd stated that she was broke, too. They'd recently had the roof on their house repaired, and she said that she didn't have any extra money, not enough to loan Sheila for a plane ticket. I'm not sure. She swallowed, not sure if she should tell Mason about her Christmas plans. Will you come with me to my grandmother's 100th birthday party on Christmas Day? He slowly nodded. She took his hand. Your grandmother is 100 years old? That's amazing. She's my great-grandmother. She nodded. Well, she needed to be honest with him. I want to go, but I don't know if I can. Why not? She didn't want to tell him about needing the money for a plane ticket. Maybe she should just accept his invite and just see her dad after Christmas. She sighed. She didn't want to disappoint her dad. He stroked her face, and she closed her eyes and sighed, relishing his sweet touch. Is this about your dad? She nodded. I might be spending Christmas with him, but I don't know yet. Anything I can do to help? She bit her lip, looked toward the wall. Did you need money? Mason, I can't ask you for money. I offered. He stroked her face. Honey, what's wrong? He pushed himself to sit upright on the couch and readjusted his heating pad behind his back. He took Sheila's hand and coaxed her to sit beside him on the couch. Chapter 13. Mason pulled Sheila into his arms. He kissed her forehead and sighed. So petite and tiny, she reminded him of a delicate, rare bird. Her dark eyes seemed wary and sometimes hopeful. All he wanted to do was make her smile. They'd only known each other for a few weeks, but he knew he was falling in love with her. But there was so much he needed to say to her. This visit to her dad was obviously important to her, and he needed to tell her what was on his mind. We never finished talking about your father. What about him? I think you should go and see him, but be open-minded. Open-minded? What do you mean? You have good memories about your father? She nodded. Yes, I told you about that. But you didn't contact him when you were an adult until he reached out to you. How come? She shrugged. I told you. I don't know. He nodded. She didn't want to admit the truth to herself. You don't want to taint your good memories about your father. That's why you didn't contact him as an adult. You were scared. She whipped her head around, moved out of his arms. That's not true. Yes, it is. I still think you should talk to your mom before you go meet him. My mom's not here. Besides, I don't know if her cell phone works while she's out on a cruise ship. She was stalling, and he knew it. He figured her mom might have some insight to share with her about her dad. You know, things look different from a child's perspective. I know that. She narrowed her eyes. Oh no, he was making her angry. He took her hand. Why aren't you sure if you're seeing your dad for Christmas? She took a deep breath, licked her pretty lips. She then went on to explain how she'd locked in her rate for a plane ticket with one of the airlines. She then explained that she needed to come up with the funds for the plane ticket. She mentioned she'd had the money a week ago, but her electricity had been turned off, and she discovered she needed to pay the electric bill. Now she was broke again and needed to come up with the funds to go see her dad before the ticket was canceled. Mason pointed to his phone and his wallet on the table. Hand me those, please. She pressed both items into his hand. He then turned his phone on and turned on his browser. He gave her the phone. Go to the website where you reserved your ticket. But, Mason, I really don't want. Honey, just do it. I can take the money out of your next paychecks if it'll make you feel better. She hesitated, held the phone in her slim fingers. Goodness, she was proud. Too proud to accept a simple loan from him. She bit her lip, closed her eyes for a few seconds before she accessed the website. In minutes, he'd taken his credit card and paid for her plane ticket. The sight even suggested a nearby hotel. Without asking her, he reserved a room that corresponded with her plane ticket. She'd be arriving back to Blue Spring on the day after Christmas. Well, it looked like he wouldn't have a date for Granny's party. That was no big deal. Sheila obviously needed to see her dad. Her flight left in 1 week. He squeezed her hand. "Thanks for letting me help you. I think you're used to taking care of others instead of letting other people take care of you." Her large, dark eyes widened and glistened. A tear rolled down her cheek. She pulled a tissue from the nearby box and wiped her wet eyes. "I'm sorry for crying. Don't apologize. I know this will be a big deal for you to see your dad again. I'm sure it's a lot for you to digest right now." "Thank you, Mason. This is one of the nicest things anybody has ever done for me." He cradled her small hands in his palm, kissed her fingers. "And you know what? I'm going to be praying for you during your entire trip." He gulped. He may as well ask her the question that had been burning in his mind like a hot biscuit ever since she'd told him about her airline ticket. "Did you want me to come with you?" Her mouth quivered, but she quickly composed herself and gave him a watery smile. "No, that's okay." "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Mason, this is something that I have to take care of by myself." He didn't want her to take care of this herself. He wanted to go with her. What if she was upset after visiting her dad? She needed somebody there for emotional support. Why couldn't she understand that? Well, he wasn't going to argue with her. He sensed that Sheila was used to taking care of everything by herself. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her lips. He inhaled her sweet perfume as they continued their kiss. "Lord, please be with Sheila during her entire journey to Washington." The pounding knock from his front door forced Mason to open his eyes. He glanced at the clock. 5:30. Sheila had been gone for over 2 hours. Wincing, he stood up. Sparks of pain shot up his back. Looked like he needed to take another dose of pain medicine. He finally hobbled to the door and opened it. Isaac. He'd called Isaac earlier and had canceled on their racquetball session. He'd never expected him to visit. The older man stepped into the house, glanced around the living room. "You sounded kind of down when you called. Just thought I'd stop by and check up on you." Ouch. He eased onto the couch, sweat beading his brow. "Hey man, you okay?" He nodded. "Just need to take some more medicine." Isaac glanced around the room. "Where is it?" "In the bathroom." Isaac soon returned with the orange prescription bottle. Mason swallowed one of the painkillers. Isaac settled onto the chair, his dark eyes assessing Mason. "What?" Isaac was staring at him as if he were upset about something. "What's the matter?" He sighed. "Do you know about Sheila's dad?" He didn't want to break Sheila's confidence. Isaac nodded. "She recently came to me during my office hours for counseling. Do you know about her financial problems?" Isaac shook his head. "She hasn't mentioned anything recently. I know she's been struggling for a while now because she hasn't had a job. That's all I know." Mason told Isaac about Sheila's upcoming visit to her father and his paying for her hotel and plane ticket. "I'm surprised she accepted your offer to buy her ticket." "She didn't want to. She struggled to accept. I think she'll do whatever she can to see her dad." Isaac nodded, glanced around the room. "Yes, I agree with you about that. So, now that she'll be going to see her dad, why do you look so upset?" "She won't let me come with her." Isaac nodded. "I can understand her wanting to go alone. Why are you so upset about it?" Mason sighed. "Wasn't it obvious? I like her a lot." He loved her. He blinked, his heart pounded. "Just feels like she's shutting me out." "Man, don't feel that way. She eventually confided to you about her dad. Give her time. She has to see her dad and get used to the situation. Just be patient." Be patient. Well, he'd try, but he wasn't sure if patience was a virtue he possessed right now. Chapter 14. Sheila squared her shoulders, taking deep breaths while she crossed the snowy street. She'd agreed to meet her dad at a pancake house that was right across the street from her hotel. They'd had a short conversation the night before. It had been strange, hearing his voice. While he spoke, she'd closed her eyes, imagined what he looked like when she was 7 years old. Mason had also called last night. His back had healed up in 2 days, and that had been a blessing. Over the past week, she'd continued working in his bakery while searching for a job. Lately, her mind had been occupied, thinking about visiting her dad. Several times over the last week, people at the bakery had had to repeat their orders a few times before she got them right. She had a hard time focusing on the customers. Mason had gently asked her if she needed to take a few days off before going to visit her father. She declined. Besides, she couldn't afford to take a few days off. The minimum wage that Mason paid her had been a godsend, and she really needed those funds to pay a few of her overdue bills. Mason had offered to count her days off as vacation days. She couldn't be indebted to him any more than she was. She'd insisted that she come to work, in spite of her absent-mindedness. "Lord, I really need your help today." She pushed the door to the pancake house open. Several red vinyl booths surrounded the large space. Waitresses in stained white uniforms rushed by carrying pots of hot coffee and steaming plates of food. The scent of meaty, salty bacon and fresh eggs filled the air. Usually, the scent of breakfast made her joyous, but this morning it made her feel sick. She focused on the customers. Where was her dad? She glanced around the booths. The only black man she saw was a salt and pepper-haired man lounging in a booth with a woman draped around him. Their lips were locked for so long, it looked like they'd never come up for air. A waitress approached her. "Can I help you, honey?" "No, I'm waiting for somebody." The waitress nodded, pointed to an empty seat near the door. "You can sit down and wait there if you like." "Thank you." Sheila settled into the chair and continued glancing around the restaurant. The salt and pepper-haired man in the booth was now alone, and he peered right at her. It was her dad. Lipstick coated his lips, and tiny wrinkles fanned from his eyes. This wasn't the way their first meeting was supposed to go. She wasn't supposed to find him lip-locked with a woman in a booth. Well, the woman was gone now. Hopefully, she wouldn't be back. The man stood up, and Sheila also stood. Her legs felt rubbery, as if she would have trouble walking. She swallowed and finally made her way to the booth. "Dad." The words slipped from her lips. She leaned toward him, and he leaned into her, and they hugged. She inhaled. He smelled like cigarettes and soap. She dropped into the booth, her head pounding. She'd been up half the night praying. "Lord, please help my headache to go away." Her hands shook. A waitress approached. She slapped 2 glasses of water onto the table. "What'll you'll have?" Have? Food was the last thing on her mind. Her father focused on the waitress. "Give us a few minutes, please. You've been sitting here for over an hour. You need to hurry up and order." So, her dad had been in this booth kissing that woman for an hour? She pushed the unpleasant thought from her mind. Sheila wasn't trying to get kicked out now. She'd better order something. She scanned the menu on the chalkboard behind the counter. "I'll have the pancake special with coffee." It was the cheapest meal listed, and she figured she had enough cash to pay for both their meals if she ordered that. Her father nodded. "I'll have the same." The waitress scurried away, leaving them alone. "Look at you. My little girl all grown up." He smiled. His 2 front teeth were gone. She barely recognized her own father, but once they got reacquainted, she was sure she'd get used to the way he looked now. She'd heard that prison could be a hard life, and her dad had wanted to see her. That was the important thing. "So, how have you been?" She didn't want to tell him that she'd been unemployed for months. Well, not yet anyway. She wanted this visit to start on a positive note. "I'm okay. I like living in Blue Spring." "Do you own your place or rent it?" The question caught her off guard. She frowned and took another sip of water. "I have my own house. It's a nice place." She gulped. There was no need for her to feel nervous. She needed to relax. "Lord, help me." She thought about her cat. "I have a cat named Tom. Once she started talking about her cat, she relaxed. She told her father all about how she'd found Tom in the animal shelter. She then told him about her volunteer work at the shelter. Once she'd finished telling him about that, their food had arrived. Her stomach no longer felt queasy. She had barely bowed her head to pray when she heard her dad wolfing down his food. She closed her eyes. Lord, help me through this meal. I've been fantasizing about this moment for months, and now that I'm here, I feel so out of sorts. Amen. Maybe she was just hungry. She hadn't had anything to eat since yesterday afternoon. Maybe that's why her head was hurting so much. After she ate some food and talked to her father some more, then she'd feel better. She'd taken 2 bites of pancakes before she realized her father had already finished his meal. He signaled the waitress for a coffee refill. "Can you also bring me a bowl of grits with lots of butter?" he mumbled before the waitress scurried away. The waitress soon brought the grits. While her father dug into his grits and slurped coffee, she continued telling him about her life. "I like to plant flowers and vegetables in the spring." She figured she needed to speak about her life since she didn't know if her father wanted to talk about his life in the slammer. He nodded. "That's nice, honey." Honey? Her dad hadn't once said her name since they'd sat down to eat. Maybe it was time for her to ask about the lady who'd been kissing him when she'd first arrived. She finally finished her meal, and her dad's spoon scraped against the bowl as he plopped the last bite of grits into his mouth. The waitress slapped their check onto the table. So, what now? Her flight didn't leave until the day after Christmas. Well, it looked like she hadn't thought this through very well. Yes, she was disappointed that the visit hadn't gone as she'd imagined. But, heck, her dad had only been out of prison for a short while. He was getting acclimated to life on the outside, so he was probably just not acting like himself. She needed to be patient. Maybe he could come to her hotel room for a meal tomorrow. No, she couldn't afford to go out to eat again. But she could get some cold cuts from the convenience store across the street. Her hotel room had a nice kitchenette. They could have sandwiches. If her memory was correct, she recalled her dad loved bologna. She could serve him scrambled egg and bologna sandwiches, just like her mom used to do. Honey, listen." Her dad's gruff voice shattered her thoughts. She focused on him. Maybe he had something important he wanted to say. "Look, I was wondering if you could give me some money. I don't know how long it'll take me to pay you back." He cleared his throat and took a sip of water. "You seem to be doing really good. You got your own place and all. It'd be nice if you could help out your old man." Her old man? She blinked. The food she'd just eaten swirled through her stomach like the waves of the ocean. "How much do you need?" She couldn't believe the words that tumbled from her mouth. She should help her dad, shouldn't she? He licked his lips, and his dark eyes suddenly sparkled. He gave her another snaggle-toothed grin. "I figure a few thousand should do it. If I need more, I'll let you know." "A few thousand?" He said the figure as if she were a millionaire, with money just lying around gathering dust. She grabbed the bill and stood up. Her headache was back. She needed to get back to the hotel. "I have to get out of here." She rushed to the register. Thank goodness there was no line waiting to pay. She gave the cashier a $20 bill before rushing out of the restaurant. "Honey, wait." Her dad's voice echoed from behind her. But she didn't stop to acknowledge him. She had to get away. She raced across the street and shoved the hotel door open. She fished her room key from her purse with shaky hands. Somehow, she managed to get into her room without dropping her key. Her stomach soured, and she barely made it to the bathroom before she hurled her breakfast into the toilet. Chapter 15. Sheila struggled to open her eyes. She peeked at the clock. 2 in the afternoon. She'd been in bed since that dreadful breakfast with her dad. Her phone buzzed. "Hello, Sheila. What's wrong? You sound funny." "Mom, baby, what's wrong? How did you know to call me?" She sat up in the bed and wrapped the blanket around her. After she got off of the phone with her mom, she was going to call the airlines to see if she could get an earlier flight home. No way was she going to stay in this town. "Miriam contacted me, but you're on your cruise." Yes, but I can still use my cell phone. Well, sometimes anyway. I can't always get a signal. Miriam left me a message and told me to call you. Oh, Mom. She took a deep breath. She then told her mother about recently corresponding with her father, their arranged meeting, and about their meetup that morning. Mom, it was like I meant nothing to him. I always thought he was a great dad. I mean, for the time he was my dad. Baby, I really wish you'd have let me know what you were planning to do. Mom, I just don't understand. I thought Dad, she gulped. Should she even refer to the man she'd met for breakfast as Dad? Well, for now, she didn't know what else to call him. I thought he was an awesome father. I loved going to his job and getting my picture taken with him. Mom, I remember he was so proud of me. Her voice wavered. No, she wouldn't cry again. She needed to toughen up and learn to get over this. But before she got over it, she needed to understand why the man she'd met that morning was so different than the father she remembered. Baby, you only went to your father's job once. That was it. Was it only one time? How could that be? Mom, are you sure? Yes, it was a father-daughter event. Your daddy didn't have a good reputation at his job. He figured bringing you to this event would help him improve his image. So, bringing me to his job that one time was all a ruse? She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Mom, her voice cracked. Sheila, don't cry. Your father isn't worth it. But how could she hinge so many memories on one moment in time? It just didn't make sense. But I thought he was a good dad. Your father was gone a lot. I used to think he had a mistress at one point, but then I learned about his illegal activities. Honey, I was so young and naive. She sighed. I really wish I'd handled this differently, but this was a precarious situation. You had a good memory of your father, and you clung to that. I didn't want to shatter the one good memory you had of your dad. She honestly didn't know what to say. Her entire body felt numb. More tears slid down her cheeks. Sheila, please don't be mad at me. I thought I made the best decision at the time. I never encouraged you to reach out to your father, but I didn't want to shatter the only positive memory you had of your dad, she repeated. Sheila remained silent, holding the phone. Sheila, I have to go. I have to be back on the ship in a half hour. I'll call you later. I'll be praying for you. I love you. Thanks for calling, Mom. I love you too. She placed her phone on the dresser and stared around her drab hotel room. She needed to get out of this place quickly. Mason strolled into the bakery. He plugged in the Christmas tree in the corner and turned on the Christmas music. He then flicked on the lights and went into the kitchen to get started. It was 3:30 in the morning, and he had to get an early start. It was Christmas Eve. For him, it was Pie Day. The families in Blue Spring would be celebrating Christmas by having a special dinner in their homes. He had special orders for 50 pies, 25 pumpkin and 25 sweet potato. All had to be made before mid-afternoon. He figured he could close early since it was Christmas Eve. He'd have to come into the bakery early Christmas morning to make Granny's birthday cake. Granny's birthday party, he'd be going dateless. But that was okay. Sheila needed to get things straight with her father. He'd called her a few times since she'd left for her trip. He'd only managed to have one conversation with her, the day before she met her dad. She'd been a nervous wreck, and he'd hoped and prayed things worked out for her. The sleigh bells jingled over the front door. Who could that be? Sheila was still in Washington State visiting her dad. He left the kitchen and rushed to the front. It was Sheila. What had happened to her? Her dark eyes appeared downcast, downright sad, and her pretty mouth drooped. She removed her coat. She finally focused on him, gave him a half-hearted smile. Hi, Mason. Sheila, you're back. He took her thin body into his arms and hugged her. So glad to see you. She shrugged. Thanks. What happened? You're back early. Mason, I can't talk about my dad right now. So, she was shutting him out. Well, if that's what she wanted to do, maybe she didn't understand that he just wanted to help her. Honey, don't call me that. Her voice hardened as she took a few steps back. Don't ever call me honey again. My name is Sheila. What had happened to her? She looked worn, hardened, distraught. Maybe she should have stayed home. I just want to help you. Thanks, but I'll talk about it when I'm ready. She followed him back into the kitchen. He brewed coffee. Maybe a bit of caffeine would help with her foul mood. After they'd had some coffee, she helped with the crusts for the pies. By the time Sheila placed the open sign on the door, he'd finished half of the pies. They cooled on the racks. Sheila would box them up. He was also offering containers of his homemade whipped cream to go with the pies. The whipped cream was $2 a tub, and he flavored it with vanilla beans. Sheila sampled a taste of his whipped cream, and her pretty eyes widened. This is so good. She smiled a bit, and that proved comforting. Maybe she was starting to feel a bit better. Since she'd started their morning preparations, she seemed more upbeat. He placed 2 Christmas cakes, decorated with etched hollies and shredded coconut, into the display. He figured someone would want to buy them for their Christmas dinner the following day. Sheila had poured another cup of coffee and made herself comfortable at a table. She studied the street outside, probably thinking about what had happened over the last few days. He may as well remind her about the party. Maybe she'd come with him after all. He joined her at the table. I wanted to ask you something before the customers come. You want to ask about the party tomorrow? He raised his eyebrows. Oh, so she'd remembered after all. Yes. Will you come? She nodded. Yes, I'll come. Hallelujah. Party starts at 1. I have to arrive early to set up the cake. She smiled. Okay. I'll pick you up at 11. Okay? Okay, Mason. The sleigh bells above the door jingled as their first Christmas Eve customer strolled into the bakery. Chapter 16. Sheila stared at her reflection in the full-length mirror. She eyed her bright red dress and high-heeled boots. She'd taken more time than usual with her makeup that morning. When she'd awakened, she'd been downtrodden, still thinking about her dad. She knew she needed to accept that her father was a jerk, but it was just so hard to forget about him. Her father's rude behavior bothered her. She honestly didn't know how to reconcile in her mind that the image of her father, the image she'd had practically her entire life, was a lie. She winced. Lord, please help me to feel better. It's Christmas Day and I feel so disappointed. She'd been shocked that Mason still wanted to take her to the party. She'd been upset when he'd called her honey. That's what her dad had called her when they'd met at the pancake house. Her dad had seemed so rude and a bit distant. Had he temporarily forgotten her name while they'd eaten their breakfast? Her mom had called her early that morning to wish her a Merry Christmas. She'd also heard from Miriam and Tony. She missed Tony and wanted to see her. Perhaps this coming summer, after she'd gotten a job, she could arrange to go and visit her good friends, Tony and Jason. A knock pounded on the front door. That had to be Mason. She checked her reflection one last time before answering the door. Mason stood on her porch, sporting a dark suit with a cream-colored shirt and a dark tie. He wasn't wearing his glasses, so she assumed he wore his contacts. His dark hair had been recently cut, and he smelled exquisite. Mason, you look wonderful. He grinned before pulling his hand from behind his back and presenting her with a tiny box. Merry Christmas. He spoke in a slow drawl, but there was no stutter. It seemed as if his speaking without a stutter took lots of effort. So, he'd gotten her a gift? She hadn't thought to buy him one. Mason was so thoughtful. She should have known he'd buy her something. Would he feel bad because she hadn't gotten him anything? Sheila, you okay? He patiently held the gift toward her. He'd done so much for her already, and this Christmas gift was more than she ever expected. Whenever someone gives you a gift, just graciously accept it. The advice her mom had always taught her came to mind. Mason's kind gesture touched something deep within her core. She smiled and took the small box from his palm. "Thanks. I'm so glad you bought me something." He gestured toward the gift as he stepped into her house and closed the door. "Please, open it." She ripped off the paper and opened the small box. Creamy white pearl studs were nestled inside. They were beautiful. "Oh, Mason, thank you." She loved them. She hugged him and he returned her embrace. The feel of his muscled arms around her made her insides mushy. She stepped out of his arms. "I'll be right back." She rushed to her bedroom and removed her earrings. She then placed Mason's exquisite pearls in her ears. Mason had gotten her this nice gift. Was he trying to tell her something? She swallowed and sat on the bed. She knew she kept Mason waiting, but his unexpected act of kindness made her pause. Her head was still spinning, trying to come to terms with the actions from her father. Now Mason gave her this nice Christmas gift. It was so totally unexpected. Well, she'd wear the earrings today and enjoy them. She'd be Mason's date for the party, and she'd be sure to have a good time. "Sheila? You okay?" "I don't want to be late. I'm coming." Mason pulled into the parking garage of the hotel. Sheila had been silent during the entire drive. He'd wondered what she'd been thinking. He figured she'd been surprised by his Christmas gift. He'd been glad when she'd accepted the earrings. They got out of his SUV. He needed to get the cake set up, but he didn't know where the room was located. The chocolate peanut butter cake was in the back seat in 3 boxes. He'd made it 3 layers, and it was the size of a small wedding cake. He needed a large cake to feed all of the party guests. He pulled out his phone and called Andrea. "Where's the party room? I need to get the cake set up. Meet me in the lobby." "Did you bring a date?" She giggled, as if his bringing a date were a joke. "Yes." He ended the call. He took Sheila's hand, and they rode the elevator. The doors slid open, and they entered the lobby. A large Christmas tree dominated the posh room. Bellboys strolled by, pushing luggage carts and assisting guests. He then spotted his twin brother Reese standing in the middle of the lobby. Reese stood in the center of the lobby, peering directly at her. He was dressed exactly the same as Mason. It appeared the brothers shared the same taste in clothing. He grinned. What was Reese doing here? She finally focused on Mason, who continued to stand beside her. "You told me Reese wasn't coming." He shrugged. "He told me he wasn't." A tall boy dressed in a dark suit rushed into the room. Who was that? When the boy turned around, she recognized Christopher, Reese's son. The boy's eyes sparkled when he spotted her. "Miss Sheila, Merry Christmas!" He rushed toward her, and he hugged her. "Merry Christmas, Chris." She returned his hug. She kissed his brown cheek and stroked the top of his head. "How have you been? I hate living in London." "I told Daddy I wanted to visit you." She didn't realize she was crying until Mason handed her a tissue. "Why are you crying? Aren't you glad to see me?" "I'm crying because I'm glad to see you. You've grown up so much." He'd gotten so tall that she'd barely recognized him. The boy then hugged Mason. "Hi, Uncle Mason. Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas, sport. You've been keeping yourself busy over in London?" "No. I hate school. I want to come back to Maryland. Why can't I live with you?" The question flew from the boy's mouth, like a cannon. Reese approached. "Chris, stop asking questions like that." The brothers hugged. Mason folded his arms in front of his chest. Reese, you told me you weren't coming." He shrugged. "I changed my mind. Chris found out about the party and he begged to come. We took the red-eye last night." He then focused on Sheila. "Hi, Sheila." "Hi, Reese." Sheila, I'll be back. I have to set up the cake." He took a nearby wheeled cart and pulled it onto the elevator. "Can I come with you, Uncle Mason?" He shrugged. "Sure." Christopher joined Mason in the elevator. The doors slid shut. She was now alone with Reese. Reese smiled at her. "Sheila, can I talk to you for a second?" "Sure." She glanced around the room and didn't see Reese's wife. Hadn't she come to the party? "You look good." She smiled. "Thanks. He cleared his throat, glanced around the lobby. He scratched the back of his neck and stared at the floor. So weird to see Reese acting like this. He'd always been cocky and self-assured, so arrogant. To see him out of sorts was strange. When he remained silent, she figured she needed to start the conversation. "You wanted to talk to me about something?" He gestured toward the bench against the wall. "Yes. Mind if we sit down?" She nodded. "Of course." They made themselves comfortable on the bench. She then looked across the room and spotted Mason. It certainly hadn't taken him long to fetch the cake. He was setting up the 3-tiered chocolate peanut butter concoction in the adjoining room. She saw a woman standing near him. It appeared the lady was giving Mason orders. She assumed this woman was Mason's cousin, Andrea. He'd mentioned her briefly on the ride over to the hotel. Christopher stood beside Mason, watching him setting up the cake. Reese stretched his long legs out in front of him. "I didn't realize you'd be here, Sheila. I was going to call you since I was in the area." "Call me?" He nodded. "Like I said, I just needed to talk to you about some things. I didn't know that you and Mason were involved." Were her and Mason really involved? She didn't really know how to define their relationship. She had deep feelings for him. "Mason and I are friends. He didn't tell you that I'm working for him?" He shook his head. "I don't talk to my brother often." "Well, I like Mason. I enjoy working with him." She didn't think it was appropriate for her to discuss her relationship with Mason any further than that. At least, not right now. Reese pressed his hands together. "Okay, Mason's a nice guy. I can understand why you'd enjoy his company." She highly doubted he solely wanted to talk to her about Mason. "Is that all you wanted to talk to me about?" "No, I've been miserable ever since I got married." "Miserable? What's this got to do with me?" He sighed. "I ended things between us so callously. I treated you badly, and I'm sorry." "Okay, thanks for being honest. I accept your apology." She might as well be honest with him. "But I'm confused. Why didn't you ever tell me about Mason?" He shrugged. "I don't mention my brother often." "You should have told me that you'd sold your place to him." She went on to tell him how she'd mistakenly thought Mason had been Reese. "It would have helped if you'd given me a heads up about that." He dipped his head. "I'm sorry. I should have told you. There's something else I want to know too. Did you only date me so that you could have somebody to help you with Christopher?" There, she'd asked the question that had been burning in her mind for weeks. Reese blinked, jerked back a bit. He appeared stunned. Good. He needed to admit to what he'd done. He licked his lips, glanced down at the floor. "I did need someone to help me with Christopher. Being a veterinarian and volunteering at the animal shelter took a lot of my time. It's hard being a single dad." He explained it away, as if his actions were justified. "Well, that stinks. If someone dates me, I want them to like me for who I am as a person. I don't want them to date me simply to take care of their child." "Ah, Sheila, you get overly emotional about stuff. Of course I liked you. You're smart, pretty, plus you were awesome with my son. Don't ever think that I didn't have feelings for you." Well, if his feelings were so strong, why'd he cheat on her? She was about to ask that question, but stopped herself. Did it really matter now? He was married, living in London, and he was no longer a part of her life. Things simply hadn't worked out for them, and she'd learned to accept that. Besides, she enjoyed spending time with Mason. If Reese had never moved to Blue Spring, then she probably would never have met his awesome brother. He touched her hand. "May I ask you something?" She nodded. He glanced down at the floor again, opened his mouth, then closed it again. He finally looked into her eyes. "Christopher has asked about you every day since we moved. I thought that he'd forget about you eventually, but he hasn't." He glanced at Mason in the adjoining room. "I haven't spoken to my brother about this yet, but I think he'll agree." "Agree to what?" "Well, I'm going to talk to Mason about keeping Christopher for part of the summer. Chris wants to work with Mason in his bakery, and I told him that it was okay as long as Mason agrees." He paused. If Christopher spends time with Mason this summer, you could see him. Seeing Christopher would be great. She honestly didn't know if her and Mason would still be together, dating this summer. Were they dating now? She pushed the thought from her mind. She'd focus on that later. It will be nice to see Christopher. Keep in touch with him. Yes. I wanted to know if it was okay for Christopher to call you sometime. He knows how to use a computer. You can also keep in touch with him through my Facebook account and through email. I didn't realize how close the two of you had been until I moved away. Reese was so self-centered that he didn't pay attention to a lot of things. She didn't feel like pointing that out to him now. Sure, I'd love to keep in touch with him. She glanced into the party room. It appeared that Mason had finished setting up the cake. Several guests had started to arrive. Where's your wife? She couldn't make it. She had other plans. You know, being married is hard. I'm still not used to it. No, she wouldn't know how hard marriage was. But she could imagine it being hard on Reese. He was used to thinking only of himself, and she'd imagine his selfishness would weigh heavy on a marriage. They finally stood up, and she made her way into the party room. Chapter 17. The woman she'd assumed was Andrea approached her. She sported a tight red dress and heavy makeup. She scrutinized Sheila from head to toe. So, you're Mason's date? Mason rushed to Sheila's side. Sheila, this is my cousin, Andrea. Andrea offered her hand, and Sheila shook it. Hi, Andrea. It's nice to meet you. Thank you. Mason, you did a good job picking your date. She smiled and sauntered away. Sheila turned toward Mason. What'd she mean by that? That's the closest she'll come to giving you a compliment. She thinks you're pretty. Soon, the room swelled with activity. More of Mason's relatives arrived, and he took Sheila from one group to the other, introducing her as his date. A DJ had arrived, and music crooned from the speakers. A large Christmas tree decorated the corner, and Christmas lights twinkled from the velveteen walls. Delicious scents of roasted chicken and potatoes streamed from the adjoining kitchen. Sheila's mouth watered, and she realized she hadn't had anything to eat that day. Mason soon pulled her over to a corner. An old regal woman sat in a wheelchair. A blanket covered her lap. Granny, this is my date, Sheila. The woman's dark eyes shone as she shook Sheila's hand. Happy 100th birthday. Sheila smiled at the older woman. I'm so glad to be here to celebrate this special day with you. Granny nodded. Thank you, dear. While Christmas music flowed and people danced, the older woman gestured toward the chair. Have a seat, Sheila. Even the woman's voice sounded regal, like a queen. Sheila sat in the offered chair. The older woman then flicked her hand toward Mason. Leave us alone, dear. I want to have a chat with Sheila. Oh no. Was this woman going to give her a hard time? Mason leaned toward Sheila and pressed his lips against her cheek before he left. Sparks of warmth shot over her skin from his brief kiss. She swallowed, still amazed that a simple kiss from Mason could affect her so much. So tell me, dear, how long have you been dating my great-grandson? Dating? They weren't dating, were they? At least not officially. I work with him in his bakery. At least that was a nice, safe, truthful response. Mason is sweet on you, dear. I can tell. Mason is nothing like his headstrong brother. When Mason is taken with a woman, she must be someone mighty special. The older woman took Sheila's hand and leaned toward her. Don't let him get away. You hear me? You're never going to find a man better than my Mason. He'll probably be the most thoughtful and generous man you'll ever date. The old woman squeezed Sheila's hand. She then leaned toward Sheila and kissed her on the cheek. I'm so glad to have both of you here at my party. So glad. The joy in her crackly voice came through. Mason magically appeared at her side. Granny, after lunch we'll cut the cake. The woman closed her eyes and nodded. Mason gently guided Sheila from her chair and kept his firm hand resting on the small of her back as he led her to their table. Christopher sat beside Sheila and Mason during lunch. They feasted on flavorful roasted chicken, potatoes, and mixed vegetables. During the meal, Mason often rubbed her back. She'd often caught him staring at her. His thoughtful, affectionate looks made her insides mushy. After they'd eaten their meal, the entire crowd sang Happy Birthday to Granny as Mason wheeled the exquisite cake to Granny's table. A few candles winked from the peanut butter frosting. The 3-layer cake had been decorated with chocolate roses and leaves. Happy Birthday, Granny had been written in chocolate cursive letters. After the happy birthday song had been sung, Mason cut the first slice of cake to serve to Granny. The remaining cake was cut and served by hotel staff. After eating 2 slices of the sweet dark chocolate cake and drinking 2 cups of hot coffee, Sheila danced with Mason. A slow song played, and she leaned into Mason, her heart pounding as he wrapped his muscular arms around her. When the DJ played some fast tunes, Sheila danced with Reese, Christopher, and some of Mason's other relatives. As she stopped dancing, out of breath, enjoying a cup of Christmas punch, she glanced around at Mason's large family. Mason approached her and kissed her cheek. "Did you enjoy yourself?" "Oh, Mason, this was the perfect Christmas." Mason pulled into Sheila's driveway. While he'd been driving back from the birthday party, he'd been praying the entire time. He'd glanced over at Sheila. She'd appeared thoughtful and quiet. She'd not said a word during the entire trip home. It was 9 o'clock, and Christmas lights sparkled from people's homes. "Lord, please open my mouth. Let me say what I need to say without stuttering so much." He reached over and took Sheila's hand. "I wanted to talk to you about something." Her dark eyes suddenly appeared wary as she gazed at their joined hands. Oh no, this wasn't a good sign. He might as well tell her what was on his mind. "I'm falling in love with you. I want us to date and have a real relationship." "Whew," he'd said, a mouthful with hardly any stuttering. He glanced over at Sheila. She released his hand. "Oh, Mason." She leaned her head back against the seat. "You don't like me? Does my stutter bother you?" He'd been going to therapy faithfully. The therapist said it'd be a few months before he saw a noticeable difference. She took his hand. "It has nothing to do with your stutter. I hardly notice it." He raised his eyebrows. Was she telling the truth? Really? Everybody noticed his stutter. He noticed the expressions on strangers' faces when they heard him speak for the first time. His stutter was off-putting, and he was determined to put an end to it. She slowly nodded. "Yes, really. I like you. I like you a lot. But Mason, I'm such a mess right now." A mess? Sheila? Was she kidding? She was the most beautiful, thoughtful woman he'd ever met in his life. Plus, she had a strong heart for God. That was his #1 quality in a woman. "You're not a mess." "Yes, I am. I'm still digesting the fact that my father thinks I'm nothing. I'm getting used to the fact that I've had this unreasonable fantasy about my dad for my entire life." He shook his head. He toyed with her fingers. "Remember when you told me about your father being in prison?" She nodded. "Yes? Well, I asked you why you didn't reach out to him when you were an adult. You said you weren't sure why. But I think you do know why." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "You didn't contact your father when you were an adult because you didn't know what to expect. It was just safer for you to hold on to that fantasy. You probably didn't feel strong enough to have your fantasy shattered. Now that it's been shattered, you're disappointed." There, he'd told her what he thought. Her pretty mouth dropped open. She then closed it. She seemed speechless. Hopefully, she wasn't angry. He might as well finish telling her what he wanted to say. "You never did tell me what happened when you met your dad. I don't like it when you shut me out like that. You have a hard time trusting me. You need to remember that I'm not like our Reese." She whipped her head around and her dark eyes sparked with anger. "I never compared you to Reese." "R. Reese hurt you pretty badly. It's hard for you to trust because he hurt you so much. You're afraid of getting hurt again. You just haven't admitted that to yourself." She released his hand and pressed her palms together. He waited. He really needed to hear what she had to say. "Mason, I just don't know. Do you want some time to think about it?" "Yes." He rushed over to her side of the car and opened her door for her. The light scent of her perfume teased his nose. He wanted to come into her house for a cup of coffee and continue talking to her, but he figured she wanted to be alone. She probably needed to think about all that he'd said. Well, he'd give her all the time she'd need. The bakery was closed between Christmas and New Year's. He was only open for a half day on New Year's Eve, just in case people needed treats for their New Year's Eve parties. Before she left for Washington, he'd told Sheila she didn't need to come into the bakery on New Year's Eve unless she really wanted to. He walked her to her door and kissed her cheek. He cradled her face with his palm, and she closed her pretty eyes. He kissed her cheek again before she went into her house. He then got into his car and drove home. Chapter 18. Sheila spent the following week walking around her house, thinking about all that Mason had said on Christmas Day. She'd called Tony and had spoken to her for over 2 hours. Her friend admitted that she felt that Mason was telling the truth about her fantasy about her dad. She also urged Sheila to give her relationship with Mason a chance. She also called Miriam, and Miriam had agreed with Tony. "Girl, you need to just let go and take a chance. Do you want to spend the rest of your life alone? From what you're telling me, I can tell that Mason is a gem. How are you going to feel if you see him going out on a date with another woman? Blue Spring is a small town, and I'd bet you'd get jealous if he started dating someone else. She'd be genuinely upset if Mason was to start dating somebody else. She'd spotted women in church giving him the once-over, admiring his good looks. She'd even overheard some women invite him out after church, but he'd always quietly declined. She highly doubted he'd decline these women's invites for long. She'd also spoken to her mom. Her mother's cruise was set to return on the day after New Year's, and her mother was anxious to see Sheila again. "Honey, pray about it. Ask the Lord to guide you," her mom had advised. The day before New Year's Eve, she'd sat on her couch, cradling Tom. She'd been watching a romance movie when her phone rang. Hello? She didn't bother looking at her caller ID. She figured it was either Miriam or Tony. "Sheila Parks?" The professional nasal voice caught her off guard. "Yes. This is Sheila. I'm calling from Baltimore Bank. We wanted to offer you the position." Hallelujah. She'd applied for that position weeks ago. After the woman had gone over the specifics, she made another request. "We wondered if you could start the day after New Year's. We know it's short notice." "Oh no, that's fine." What a blessing. Things were finally looking up for her. The following day, she cradled Tom on her lap while she watched the New York New Year's Eve celebration on TV. While she watched the ball drop on Times Square, she hugged her cat. All she'd been doing all day was thinking about her new job and about what Mason had told her on Christmas Day. Truth be told, he was right about her fantasizing about her dad. She'd never contacted him on her own as an adult because she was scared. She wanted to hold on to that image she had of her father, not sure if she'd be strong enough to face the truth about him. Did she have a hard time trusting Mason because of the way Reese had treated her? She didn't feel ready to date anybody because she still hadn't gotten over the way Reese had callously hurt her. But Mason could see that. How could Mason so accurately see things about her? Things that she didn't realize about herself. She was closer to Mason than she'd ever been to Reese. Reese never knew that her dad was imprisoned. She'd told Mason, but she hadn't told him everything. She never told Mason all that had happened when she'd visited her father. Happy New Year! The New York City crowd rang in the new year, while Old Lang Syne played in the background. She stroked Tom's fur. Happy New Year, Tom. She knew just what she needed to do for the new year. She wasn't one to make New Year's resolutions, but she made a vow to herself. She needed to have a heart-to-heart talk with Mason Smith. "Amen," Sheila mumbled. She opened her eyes and scanned the church. It was the Sunday after New Year's, and Pastor Isaac had just finished the closing prayer. She spotted Mason sitting near the back. He must have come in late, because she hadn't seen him before service started. He looked amazing. He sported a suit and tie, and it looked like he was growing a mustache. She grabbed her coat and rushed over to him. "Mason, do you mind if we go get a bite to eat? I'll treat." He grinned, showing his perfect white teeth. "I don't mind treating." "No, let me treat." He'd done so much for her. The least she could do was buy him lunch. She'd given her house a thorough cleaning over the holidays. Surprisingly, she'd found $40 tucked away in the pocket of one of her old winter coats. She honestly couldn't recall why she had the funds, but she knew how she wanted to spend it. He dipped his head. "Okay." He then pulled her into his arms. "I'm so glad that you want to speak to me." He helped her with her coat. They then walked into the frigid cold air. "I thought we could walk over to the drugstore. I'm craving a burger." Puffs of white air rose from her mouth when she spoke. "Sounds good." Henderson's drugstore boasted an awesome lunch counter. They walked to the drugstore in silence. After they were seated in a corner booth, they ordered their food while music crooned from the jukebox. After their waitress left the table, Sheila grinned. "Well, first off, I have a job now. I started day after New Year's and I love it." "Sheila, that's great." She told him a bit more about her job, and he listened, asking questions about the bank where she now worked. Once they were finished talking about her new job, Sheila gazed outside. "Looks like all the Christmas decorations have been taken down." Mason nodded. The Christmas decorations always came down the day after New Year's. Well, she couldn't wait any longer. She might as well tell Mason what she had to say. "Mason, I'm sorry for shutting you out. You're the kindest, sweetest man I've ever dated. I admit that I wasn't over how your brother hurt me. And now, I'm ready to move forward with my life." She took a deep breath. "I wanted to tell you about my visit to my dad." While they ate their tasty burgers and hot salty fries, she told him about how her father had acted. "Mason, it was so humiliating. But you know, I've learned to be more truthful with myself. I was always afraid that may happen, but I never learned that I was looking at my relationship with my dad through rose-colored glasses. Miriam tried to warn me about this, but I didn't listen. Even you could see that I wasn't being truthful to myself. Sorry about your dad. I know how disappointed you were." She nodded and took his hand. "I'd like to give our relationship a chance." "Yes, Sheila, I'm so happy to hear that." He cradled her hand. "I've been in speech therapy for a month. I never told you about that." She leaned toward him. "Your stutter doesn't bother me, Mason." He narrowed his dark, intense eyes. "But it bothers me. I'm determined to get rid of it." He then leaned in and kissed her on the mouth. 6 months later, Sheila stood at the altar, right next to Mason. Her white satin wedding dress accented her dark skin. Mason looked dashing in his tuxedo. Christopher stood next to them in a suit, carrying a large pillow as their ring bearer. Miriam sported a dark blue dress as her bridesmaid. She'd wanted her friend Tony to be a bridesmaid too. But she was 8.5 months pregnant, and it wasn't a good idea for her to travel so far. Reese stood as Mason's best man. Sheila had been glad that she and Reese had learned to be friends. Pastor Isaac cleared his throat. "Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I certainly do." Mason's deep voice boomed through the sanctuary. He'd been in speech therapy for months, and his stutter was finally gone. He still had to concentrate, especially when he was excited or angry, to be sure he thought his words through so that he didn't stutter. She knew he was just glad that all of his hard work and intense therapy had paid off. Isaac cleared his throat. "And do you, Sheila, take this man as your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." Isaac smiled at the couple. "I pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride." "I love you, Sheila." Mason's eyes sparkled as he leaned toward her. I love you too, Mason. Sheila leaned toward him, and they kissed.
Thanks for listening to Sugar and Spice. I hope you love Sheila and Mason as much as I do. If you enjoyed Sugar and Spice, then head over to Amazon or Goodreads and leave me a sweet review. Also, hit the like and subscribe buttons. If you subscribe, it really helps me out by enabling me to provide more free audiobooks for your enjoyment. If you enjoyed Sugar and Spice, then be sure to check out Southern Comfort. Get ready to dive into the lives of Carl and Miriam. Carl is blind and Miriam is a victim. Healing from a recent trauma, she's determined to raise her daughter in a safe, wholesome environment. Can Carl convince Miriam to take a chance on love? See the links for both Sugar and Spice and Southern Comfort in the comments. And again, as already mentioned, hit the like and subscribe buttons and tell your friends, family, co-workers, church members, anybody you know about the free audiobooks that are available on YouTube. Thanks again for listening and have a blessed day.